We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AV Rant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And this is the week of our Thankful on Infinite podcast Thanksgiving episode, which should have been available to you prior to this episode. So hopefully
That's
you
right.
have listened and or watched, particularly watched, because it's fun. The video version is fun, and enjoyed that.
I want to congratulate DJ. It sounds like he's almost through puberty. His voice is only cracking a little bit at the beginning of the podcast. I figure he must be very proud.
He was excited.
He's a late bloomer.
That's right.
It's all right, though.
He was excited.
That's what he gets.
But even though that was a 2 hour and over 15-minute episode that has been posted
It's
here,
a weird way of saying that.
Here we are again. Here is the regular AV Rant to answer questions, because that's what we do. Home theater and AV questions answered. So I can't let that go for a week, because we got a whole build-up of questions.
We do. And I am... Even though it's the middle of the day on Tuesday, I am still... I told Rob, I'm totally exhausted. My brain is fuzzy. I can barely speak. I went to bed too late, got up too early, and climbed really hard last night at the climbing gym, and now I can't move all of my limbs the way they should be able to move. And I have a screaming headache. So,
beautiful.
With that, let's talk about the Tribit. Are we calling it Tribit or Tribit? I think it's Tribit.
I think it's Tribit. I'm pretty sure it's Tribit.
It's gotta be, right?
It's gotta be, one would think.
Anyways, Tribit QuietPlus 50 active noise canceling Bluetooth headphones. They're right here. If you're on the video and you're saying, what is that black form? This is them. They are black. It does say Tribit on the side, but it's just kind of shiny. But they fold up. So we'll just do the basics first. They fold up. They have controls on the left ear cup, which you've got better eyes than me if you can tell which one's left from right, because it's also black. Everything on this thing's black. But so the reason I got these headphones in for review was because they promised to have dual Bluetooth connectivity, meaning that they could connect to two different Bluetooth devices at the same time. And for me, I thought about this in relation to my wife, mostly because she's working from home, she's Zooming, she's Microsoft Teaming, I don't know what all programs she uses, and then she's also got her phone that she needs to stay aware of and stuff. So I thought she could connect to both of these things.
Sure.
So first of all, comfort-wise, these are very comfortable. They have like the sort of memory foam type ear cups, so which is common, and with the pleather, which is fine. I think they retail for around. I think they retail for around $50. Look it up, Rob. I forgot. But
you know what? Hold them up again, because I prepared the video so that people can actually see it this time instead of the side by side. So there you go.
There you go. All right. There's the little controls right here. Can you see them? No, neither can I. They're impossible to see. We'll talk a little bit more about functionality, but comfort-wise, most people. Oh, dude, I just realized that it has a big L and a big R inside the ear cup.
Oh yes, that'll do it.
See, right there. I never saw that before. So there you go. That's not in the written review that I did on AV Gadgets, but it is. Wow, I might have to add that. So that's convenient, but you don't ever really need that, because you know that the controls are on the left ear cup, so you're fine.
Sure.
Comfort-wise, quite comfortable. I call them over-ear because I have small ears. You may call them on-ears.
Right.
Depending on the size of your ears, but I found them to be pretty comfortable. I've worn them for hours at a time with very little problem. One time I had like one ear off, so it kind of angled it weird, so I could hear what was going on in the house, and then that made my ear hurt. But that was the only time I ever had experienced any sort of discomfort with them, and I blame myself for that. Active noise canceling works pretty well, about as well as anything else I've tried. It doesn't shut my kids out, which is the one thing I want it to do. But it does get rid of, like,
noise canceling works.
I know it doesn't, but someday my dream will be realized. The kids off button, the kid mute button will be invented, and parents all over the world will cry out in joy. But you don't realize how much just background noise there is in your house until you turn these, an active noise canceling feature on. You're like, oh wow, didn't even know that there was that many things just kind of humming in the background. So it works pretty well. Sound quality wise, if you are thinking that $50 active noise canceling Bluetooth headphones are going to be the creme de la creme, I would love to live in the fantasy world that you live in, but they sound pretty good. They have a tipped up bass, which is what you expect with every headphone these days. It seems like that's the default setting these days, but they have enough treble to kind of balance it out, and it's not as egregious as many headphones I have.
Okay, so not quite a smiley face curve or a V-shaped curve, more just a pleasant bass boost.
It has a bass. There's no doubt it has a bass boost, but it's not like I've had some that are so bad you're like, I can't listen to these things. So these are much more pleasant. Battery wise, they claim, I don't know what they claim, like 30 hours or something like that. I don't know. I used them on and off for 3 days before I decided I should go ahead and charge them again. And I never got any warning that the battery was getting low. So, I mean, a couple hours here, a couple hours there, and then they sat. The other thing that is kind of, I don't know, something to be aware of, they don't turn themselves off.
Oh.
So if you set them down and not whatever, they just stay on until you decide to turn them back off again, which I guess it kind of makes sense if you're connected to your computer or whatever, and there's notifications that are coming up or whatever, you want to be able to hear them even if you're not actively listening. If you're just using them for the noise canceling part of it, I guess that makes sense, but you do have to manually turn them off, which is just something about most of the time I remembered, but not every time. I did come back to them and saw that they were on. Let me think here with the rest of it. So the way that the pairing two different Bluetooth devices works is you pair one, and then you, from your device, like if it's your computer or your laptop, or your phone, you go into your device, you tell it to unpair, and then you pair a second device to it, and then you go back to your first device and you pair that second that device again.
All right.
Now, whichever is the one that was the second part of that step. So when you're pairing two together, the one that you pair first is basically the primary, and the one you pair second is the secondary. So in my case, I started with my computer. I unconnected my computer. I connected my phone, and then connected my computer. Okay, and I believe that the way that works is then your phone would be the primary. It may be the computer, but one becomes a primary and one becomes a secondary. So whatever the primary is, you get the majority of your sounds through. Okay. So in my case, the computer, however I connected it, I don't remember if I did phone or computer first. The way I connected it, I must have done phone and then computer, and then that's the way that I did it. Because the computer was primary. The computer, I got all of the notifications, all of the music, all that stuff. And then when I got a call on my phone, it would override the computer. I would get the notification and I could take the call. Now, sound quality on the call was great. Microphone, there's a built-in mic, of course, and that worked great. Everybody told me that I sounded natural, that there was nothing wrong with my voice. I didn't sound, echoey or hollowy or anything like that. And that worked fine. But, okay, the notifications from your phone, like for emails or texts and all that stuff, that did not come across. I did not get those over the top of my computer.
But if you had connected them in reverse order, then you might have got those, but not the sounds from your computer.
Exactly. So if I go into my phone with the way I had it connected with the computer primary, if I go into the phone and I press play on a song, it will show that it's playing. It will not play any music through the phone, and you cannot hear it in the headphones. The only way you can hear it in the headphones is by turning off, disconnecting the computer, and then the phone becomes primary. You can then hear that sort of thing. So obviously the way to do this is to make sure that you can see your phone at the same time as you're working with your computer if you want your computer to be primary, and then vice versa. If you want your phone to be primary, you want to be able to see any notifications that you would get up on your... It didn't work exactly the way I wanted it to, is what I'm saying. I wanted it to be like, I got all the notifications
all sounds
from everywhere.
Both devices all the time? No.
But clearly that's... I would bet that's the limitation of Bluetooth and not a limitation in the actual device. So that's more of a thing to be aware of and to work around, and once you kind of know how it works, it's not that hard to deal with. Overall, I've been using them kind of nonstop. They're comfortable, they're easy to, and they not only did they remember the different devices I had them connected to, but they remember the order. So when I would disconnect everything from it and then reconnect it, it would go in the same order I had it before. So it had the primary as the same primary and the secondary as the same secondary. So I like these things. I think that these would be a great headphone to travel with. They come with a little velvet bag or whatever. And of course, if you run out of battery, you can plug them in directly into your. They get pretty small, small enough to tuck into a carry-on or something like that. They're not going to get tiny, and they're light. They're insanely light, but they don't feel cheap, if that makes sense. Sometimes you get these really light things and it feels like everything's bendy. You're afraid you're going to break them. These don't, but they're just black plastic. It has a kind of a softish feel to the plastic, which is bizarre, but I'm real happy with them. So I guess my only complaint, if I had a real complaint, is the way they have the control set up is they have the volume kind of on the bottom and the power on and off at the top, but above the top they have this little grate, which I think is probably for the active noise canceling microphones, and then below the volume control they have the plugs, so you can't just touch your finger to the top of the ear cup and then slide it down and the first thing you feel is that button, or kick it from the bottom and the first thing that you feel is the volume control. You feel something else first, so you still have to go kind of hunting for it. It would have been better if they had put the controls so that without even really thinking about it, you could just slide down or slide up, and the first thing that you touched, you knew that it was what you were looking for. The other thing is they tried to, most Bluetooth, the I call it the all-purpose button. You click it once to connect or to start something, you click it twice to stop something. Sometimes you hold it or do 3 clicks to make it fast forward or whatever. Or with the volume control, you can do the same thing. It has all that same functionality, but they also are like, if you want to redial, you hold this button and this button together at the same time, and then that'll redial. I'm like, yeah. I mean, it's on one ear cup. I'm trying to figure out how to make my hand do that. So I'm like, I could take both hands and do it. But I'm like, if I'm doing both hands on one ear cup, I'm just going to pick up my phone and hit redial. But, that was a nice thought. They tried. So that's something. So that's my review of the Tribit QuietPlus 50 active noise canceling Bluetooth headphones. Yeah, recommended. I like
can confirm so. $50. So quite an affordable
$50. Yeah, it's really, really quite not bad. I think this would be a great gift.
Right.
For just about. I'm looking around at Christmas and we're all like, what are we gonna get? Because we usually like to take trips and stuff. We're like, I don't know. I guess. How do you guys feel about socks?
Yep.
Doing socks this year. So what about you, Rob? You got some, you want to talk about that video that we put out? I guess that there's audio as well, too. I put out the audio as well.
Of the settings. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought that's what you're referring to. Yes. Just to confirm, I went through settings for the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5, including audio settings, which very few other people are giving their recommendation settings for that. Plenty of people giving the video settings, not that many giving the audio settings. That video and audio is already outdated. Xbox got an update that more or less fixed the Blu-ray player. So very good news there. Prior to the update, the Blu-ray player had elevated black levels, which I mentioned in that settings video. That has been fixed. So good. Great for Microsoft. That means that I would say for everything that is not games, the Xbox Series X is the superior console. It is not perfect, but it is the superior choice. Before, it was like the Xbox Series X is a little bit better for streaming services, although it has some weird quirks like Netflix being stuck in HDR at all times and Amazon not switching back and forth between HDR and SDR. But it was still a little bit better on the streaming video front than the PlayStation 5, whereas the PlayStation 5 had the better Blu-ray player. But now the Xbox Series X Blu-ray player is just as good. So, there you go. That's the update to that video. But otherwise, my recommendations still stand.
There you go. We should put like some sort of disclaimer at the bottom or the show notes of that one saying, hey, Xbox Series X got fixed or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if we ever do that. I don't know. All right, this is AV Rant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Email is a hard word to say, apparently, when you've got like 4 hours of sleep and you can't move your arms correctly. You can go to avrant.com, leave us a comment there, facebook.com/avrantpodcast, youtube.com/avrant. You can contact Rob directly at rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is @firstreflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is @avrant_Tom. I want to thank our listeners of the week. One of the ways you can become a listener of the week is support the podcast in some way. And you do that financially by going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. And we want to thank Kevin and Dazz for doing that. That sent them to a PayPal donation site where they could have used their PayPal account or a credit card to send us money. And they did. So thank you, Kevin and Dazz.
For sure. Kevin and Dazz, thank you both very much for those PayPal donations. Really appreciate it.
If you want to become a supporting and continuing supporting member of the podcast and you're too lazy to go every month to the website and click on the button, which is exactly the way I would feel about it, you can go to patreon.com/avrantpodcast and sign up. So we have 127 patrons over at Patreon. It's a monthly subscription. Every month they take a little money from you and give it to us. Out of our 127 patrons, Bryce is one, and he says he's been listening for 2 years, and he's building a home theater based on all of our recommendations. So thank you very much, Bryce, and our patrons.
For sure. Patreon.com/avrantpodcast. Anybody who'd like to sign up, we broke the 125 barrier. We're up to 127. Probably won't stay there forever, but for now, it moved up. So,
it's a Christmas spirit.
The trajectory over time, a little up and down, but overall gradually going up. So really appreciate that. 127 patrons over there. Love to see it. And Bryce, thank you very much for being one of them.
Thank you. If you can't support us financially, find some way to support us and let us know what you did and we'll mention you. One of the ways that people are supporting us right now is just by sending us little love notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going during this pandemic and election season. I'm not sure which one was more stressful, but kind of feels like the pandemic. I guess it's got the upper hand for just the length of time. But we want to thank James and Brandon for sending us, and other people, but Brandon's got a thing, so I'm going to read that in a second. So James and Brandon. Brandon, he saw, I guess his son saw that I had grown a beard on our YouTube video and said, "Oh, Tom grew a beard. Now he looks like a hobo." But then moments later, I, in a fit of prescience, made fun of Brandon for the photo of his outdoor speakers perched on the fence, and that said it made it look like Brandon lives on a compound for a cult. His son was laughing pretty good, so thanks for that episode. Dan, his offer to send good season dressing packets is still open for me. I want to let him know I did find some.
Oh, yay.
So that's why I haven't reached back out to him. I meant to mention on the podcast, so thank you, Dan, for reminding me to say something about that. Nathan and Nelson, who both got a kick out of SVS's newsletter, including an article about why the center channel is the most important speaker in your home theater. Sorry, guys.
Now, to be fair, if you actually click on the link, they do have the word arguably in that headline. In the newsletter, it didn't put the word arguably, but in the actual article, they do say it is arguably the most important speaker. So even they're aware. They must have heard it from us.
You can argue it. You'll be wrong, but you can argue it all you want. Bastian congratulates me for having my house back, which is mostly true. We have one small thing to get fixed, and the bathroom, something's going haywire in there as far as the hand towel hook is falling out of the wall already. So I called that.
But you
guy.
are not in an Airbnb, so
I am not in an Airbnb, and it is starting to feel like we're back in the house. We're starting to get angry at each other all the time, so that's normal. Chris says he can't remember how long he's been a listener, but he recalls episode 500 being a big deal, so it's been at least that long. Luke, Chad, Dazz, Vince says, thanks to our recommendations, he's owned pretty much every speaker model that Ascend Acoustics makes at this point, and now he's got 4 Lunas as surrounds. Nice. Welcome to the wonderful world of Rob. Jarius, Infinite Gary, and Bertrand all sent. So that's let me go back over them. James, Brandon, Nathan, Nelson, Dan, Bastian, Chris, Luke, Chad, Dazz, Vince, Jarius, Infinite Gary, and Bertrand all sent notes of thanks, and we thank you for thanking us.
I guess I'll repeat the names once more. James, Brandon, Dan, Nathan, Nelson, Bastian, Chris, Luke, Chad, Dazz, Vince, J. Iris. It's not Jarius. It's J. Iris. It's switched.
What?
Yeah, that's right
J.
there. That's how it's
Iris?
pronounced. J. Iris.
I just thought you would want to know that together.
I know.
Jarius.
Anyway, that's what he specifically called it out. So it's J. Iris, and then Infinite Gary and Bertrand. It's a lot of names. It's a lot of support. It's awesome. Obviously, we're in the Thanksgiving season, and people felt like reaching out, and we really appreciate it because it's wonderful to see that notes of gratitude, the encouragement. We can use it. So thank you all very, very much. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. If you actually listen to this on Thanksgiving Day on the video version, or happy Black Friday. You might be listening to this the audio version on Black Friday. So there you go.
That's right.
Wonderful. And thank you, everyone, for continuing to listen and sending in your questions.
Or Sigmund Freud just sat up in his casket going, did he say dad?
Went from Brandon to Nathan. No, wait, Dan first. I'm still getting mixed up. Can't fix it.
Don't worry about it. All right, in the news, SVS, to the surprise of nobody that listens to this podcast, they announced their Series 2000 Black Friday sale. It's $500 for the SB2000, the $600 for the PB2000, $750 for the PC2000. All new, all brand new, newly manufactured, and all in black ash finish. So we called it. Yeah. And in fact, you know, they actually... I can say this, right? They reached out to us and said, "Did somebody tell you?" And I was like, "We're like,
oh, we put two and two together."
It's really not that hard.
I mean, genuinely, nobody told us anything before this got announced. Absolutely not. We were just like, "Yeah, we fully expect this will happen." And then one fellow was like, "Oh, I got a PC 2000 at a discount," so that's what I tweeted out first. And so they were like, "Hey, did this leak early?" I'm like, "No, but." Good. Good that this is happening. So that SB 2000 price, $500 for the SB 2000. Why would you get an SB 1000 right now while the sale is going on? That would be the question.
No kidding.
But
if you look at on their Facebook post, which I think I shared to the AV Rant Facebook feed, all of this is comments of people saying, "I was going to buy a 1000, but
right.
I went ahead and bought it too."
Yes. Yeah.
So, which is exactly what you should do. So yeah, this is a great deal. You guys should
supply
jump on
is limited. Hop on it. I don't know. By the time you hear this, they might all be gone for all we know. But
they might be.
I'll try to get this out at some point. Well, Thursday. That's when it's coming out.
Yeah. Let's see here. Wonder Woman 1984 will get a theatrical release on Christmas Day in locations where theaters are allowed to be open, but it's also coming day and date to HBO Max streaming. You won't have to pay anything extra. You just have to be an HBO Max subscriber.
They gave up.
Damn them. Damn them. Damn them.
I see.
Like, I do not want HBO Max, but I really want to see Wonder Woman.
There's probably a trial.
Whatever it's called.
There's probably a trial. You're gonna have a lot of signups for that trial on Christmas Day. So still at the time, no 4K, no HDR, no Atmos on HBO Max. It's
right.
Still 1080p 5.1 at the most. People are like literally petitioning HBO Max Warner Brothers to add HDR and Atmos because they've said that they plan to add them at some point. People are like, can we have that in time for Wonder Woman 1984, please? You would see.
Please, sir. May we have the HDR?
Yes.
Please, sir.
But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
That's terrible.
Nonetheless,
accent.
that'll be a way
awful.
to watch it.
All right, this comes from Clara on Twitter. Plex has added HDR to SDR tone mapping capability. It's in preview for Plex Pass subscribers right now. This could be helpful for quite a few projector setups. And if you watch your Plex library on lots of different devices, it could be helpful there too. So that's cool. Yeah. That's a good thing. Some comments from our listeners. Jonathan just felt like venting to people who might understand. Oh my God, this is a huge paragraph. Okay. All right, so first... Still no HBO Max on Roku. He bought an NVIDIA Shield cylinder as a result, but his wife subscribes to BritBox, and that doesn't work on the Shield. He has to keep both streaming devices connected, which is absurd. Second, Verizon Fios was going to cost him $120 a month to keep, and that was only going to be 200 megabits per second up and down, and it would have been even more expensive if he canceled their landline, which, of course, they never use. So he switched to Optimum, who promised to lock in his price at $68.50 a month for life with 1 gig service and free installation, no contract. Okay. Yeah, I don't know whose life that is. Anyways, but the installer was lazy. He repurposed old used cables and splitters, and they absolutely refused to put their cable modem router into bridge mode. So now he has a double NAT, which is
I forget
the
what
Wi-Fi
that
interface.
stands for, yeah.
I forget it too. The Wi-Fi interface is coming from inside the house. Anyways, because customers are locked out of changing the settings in the supplied modem. So he can't go in there and change the settings in the modem himself. And they won't put it in the bridge mode, which is...
So he's got two Wi-Fi signals going, interfering with each other. Wonderful.
Yeah. Which is a pain. And yes, he definitely should complain to somebody until they come out there and do that, because that's ridiculous. And the 1 gigabit gig speed may be at 2 a.m., but most of the time he's getting about 30 megabits per second, not 30 gigs. And that Verizon Fios interface is sitting there waiting to be reconnected. So that's all the stuff. So luckily in my setup, I have like an old Motorola stuff from, yeah, and this is exactly what happens. If you guys are having like everybody at home right now, and by now you all know that I am writing for AV Gadgets these days. And I just wrote an article about this, believe it or not. I don't know if I published it.
How would everybody know that? You haven't made the announcement official on our regular episode. So if they haven't listened to the Thanksgiving episode...
Oh, you're right. I guess you're right. Okay.
So Tom hasn't announced it,
on the Thanksgiving
everyone.
episode, you need to go to listen to the end, because at the end I announced that I am back in the AV writing game, and I'm writing for avgadgets.com. So it's all one word, avgadgets.com. I'm the editor-in-chief. I'm the only writer there. Clint DeBoer basically started the website, but doesn't really have the time or the energy to do it himself, so he has hired me to basically run the website for him. So editor-in-chief, avgadgets.com. I wrote an article about this, which basically says exactly this. Put your modem in from your service provider, which is almost always garbage. I mean, it's like 10-year-old tech, if that. And what it can do is pass the internet through just fine. What it cannot
do... modem.
Yes, it can be a modem just fine. What it cannot do well is all the rest of the things, and that's why you can't get the speed that you're promised, and that's why you're like, in my house, we were trying to record this podcast, and every hour, almost on the hour, the modem would just be like, yeah, we're good. We're good. The router part of the modem was like, I need to take a breather, guys. I'll be back in 5 minutes. And it was like killing us. So I went in, I looked it up how to do it. Online, it wasn't that hard. You connect your computer directly to your router, and you put it into modem mode or bridged mode or whatever it is. You disconnect the Wi-Fi capabilities of it, and you make it into a modem. You connect your router to it, and suddenly, you get the great speed. And I haven't reset my modem. Or my router, and like, I think I do it maybe once a year, and it's only because my wife insists on doing it. She's like, wait a second, I think the internet's slow. I'm like, it's not. You have 75 tabs open, woman. What do you think? Between her and the kids, there's 75 tabs open, and like the entire desktop is just, it's like garbage. I don't know what I could delete it all and they would never know. So good. Jonathan, I hope that you can get them to fix that for you, because that's ridiculous. So we got an update from Bob in the Philippines. His LG OLED that he had the power board replaced. Every time he turns it on, it's still giving him the warning that his power board needs replacing. LG doesn't seem to have updated their database yet. He's resorted to completely disconnecting his OLED from the internet. The warning doesn't pop up if it can't phone home. Now that the power board has been replaced, he could swear colors look more vivid now. Is it just a placebo effect? Or since the original power board was, in fact, all scorched, could have been impacting image quality before? I mean, I don't. It could.
Seems
I guess
possible to me.
I mean, there's like, your guess is as good as ours on this one. I could say yes, because I think that's what you want me to say, and then everybody could go home happy. But honestly, we don't have any idea of knowing. And I don't think anybody else would either, without testing the board.
I am not going to suggest taking your TV back down off the wall, opening up the back panel, and putting the scorched one back in. Just to see. Because that process would take too long. You've probably forgotten what it looked like anyway. So, you know what? I will just say, be very happy with the new power board replacement. I think it was a good thing that it was done, obviously. And I don't know if LG will ever update that database and take that warning away from you. But he's like, that's okay. I have a separate streaming device. Don't need to use the built-in apps. Doesn't really need to be connected to the internet.
There you go.
All's well that ends well.
About once a month, I'd plug it in to see if it fixed it, and if not, then whatever. All right, Jay, these are the questions here. Jay has a scenario where getting an aftermarket power cord actually makes sense. He's trying to reduce his cable clutter, and he really only needs power cords that are 2, 3, or 4 feet long, but a couple of them are for potentially higher current devices, his Marantz receiver and his Outlaw Model 5000 amp. So what do we recommend for shorter length replacement power cords? Honestly, as long as it's not like something weirdly thin, I think that any 3-prong power cord that fits would be fine.
To stay safe, I'll say get a 14 gauge one, because 14 gauge for anything that is 120 volt, 15 amp. The lines inside your walls are 14 gauge. So a 14 gauge replacement power cord will definitely be okay for any device. Monoprice is where I would send you to get that. Now, the ones that they have in 14 gauge, with the IEC inlet, which is what's going to be on the back of any device that takes a replacement power cord. Those ones, they don't have a 4-foot length. They go 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, and then jump to 6 feet, and then go longer than that. So you won't be able to get the 4-foot, but maybe the 3-foot will work, or the 6-foot. Now, the 6-foot one is $3.66, so I really don't think they're ripping you off. The 3-foot one is $2.61, so I'm betting the shipping on these is more expensive than the product itself. But they are a 3-prong design, and you might be thinking to yourself, because some AV receivers and whatnot only have the 2 prongs. They don't have the ground prong. And you might be thinking, do I have to get one that's 2-prong? No, it is perfectly fine to plug a 3-prong version of the cord into a 2-prong device. Obviously, the ground at the, say, AV receiver side won't be plugged into anything, but having the ground prong plugged in at the wall outlet is no sort of problem. So don't worry about that.
Right.
These cords will work for any of the devices that take an IEC inlet.
All right, Jason. I guess we're also going to address Dan and Chris in here too, because
very similar questions. Anyway. Yep.
Jason and his wife just moved. Some good news, bad news. His 2016 75-inch Vizio P-Series got damaged during the move, but that means he got to replace it with a 77-inch LG CX OLED. Ooh. I hope somebody threw you some money for that. But before we get to that, in Jason's previous place, it was pre-wired for 5.1, but they are renting their new place, and his wife doesn't want wires running all around the room. He needs something to make his subwoofers wireless and his surround speakers wireless. Dan and Chris want the same thing, convert existing subwoofer and surround speakers to wireless. So what do we suggest? He's fine paying a bit more if it means a rock-solid connection. So the ones that we usually recommend are from, I don't want to look at the links, Outlaw, is that right?
Yeah,
Outlaw.
Yeah, for the subwoofer, for the wireless subwoofer, Outlaw Audio's OAW4 is the one I like to recommend. It is not the cheapest on the market, but at $130 for the transmitter-receiver pair, which of course you will need to start this whole thing, it's not egregiously expensive. I like the form factor design. I like that it has a regular power cord instead of relying on just USB connections to supply power, and the connection is rock solid. It has frequency skipping if it detects any interference. So that is about as good as it gets on the sending it to a subwoofer signal. If the speakers you want to send the signal to are self-powered, or you have an amplifier that you're going to position at the back of your room to plug into it, it could work for that as well. But this is just a line-level transmitter. If you did want to send it to 2 separate devices on opposite sides of the room, so you need an additional receiving unit, you can get those for $65 a piece. So you will get at least one package of the transmitter and receiver. It is stereo, but it can transmit to up to 4 receiving devices simultaneously. So if you needed to, you could use just the left output on the receiver that came with and purchase an additional receiving unit for $65 on the other side. But if your surround speakers are not self-powered, there's a solution for that. Tom?
Okay. His friend has a 4-year-old...
I didn't say what it was. I thought you were going to go into the solution for the surround speakers.
Oh, no, I wasn't going to.
Okay,
I was not listening to you at all.
Amphony,
Yes.
Amphony, AMPHONY, because it's hard to pronounce, but that is the name, Amphony. Their model 1700 is the current one. And what's interesting about these, of course, that has a little wireless transmitting unit, but then the receiving unit has... Let's see. Just to say on the transmitter, it's got speaker wire inputs. So even if your AV receiver doesn't have pre-outs, you can still connect your surround speakers to the transmitting device because it has speaker wire inputs as well as a 3.5 millimeter. They include the adapter cable, so you could plug stereo RCA into 3.5 in if you are using pre-outs, or you can use speaker wire. And then the receiving unit is an amplifier. It is a stereo amplifier. So again, if you want to have separate units on either side of the room because you don't want to run speaker wires to, say, the middle of your back wall to pair off to your 2 surround speakers. If you want a wireless amplifier on the left side of your room and another one on the right side of your room, then you can do that. You can purchase the additional add-on receiving units, which are also an amplifier. So the combo of the transmitter and a single receiving stereo amplifier unit is $100, really very affordable. An additional receiving unit, which is another stereo amplifier, that is $60, but it does not come with a power adapter for some weird reason. They sell that separately for $11, so you're looking at $71 to add another receiving unit. But all in all, very affordable prices.
That is very bizarre. And that website has the world's smallest images.
I know.
What is the deal with that?
Well, see,
it's so bizarre.
It's
their own website.
Anthony used to have a model 1800 where it was 2 mono receiving units that came with it in the package, but they don't sell that anymore. They just reduced their product lineup just to the 1700, and they're like, hey, if you want separate units, you just get 2 of the stereo units and only use the left side on one and the right side on the other. There
you go. All right, his friend has a 4-year-old E-series LG OLED, and he was trying to compare settings with him, but the CX series seems to have different menus in a different version of the web OS. Do the older models not get updated to keep their experience consistent? I don't think that's ever been
They do not.
Nobody.
Whatever version of WebOS came on the LG TV out of the box, it stays on that version of WebOS. They don't update it from year to year. That has been a constant criticism, especially over at Flat Panels HD. They criticize them all the time. Digital Trends does too. They're like, why can't, everything else gets upgraded. Why can't you upgrade the WebOS version? But they don't. So yes, some of the positioning of the menu items and that is not consistent from year to year.
So how does he get the best performance from this frame-by-frame tone mapping that Rob is always going on about? Yeah, I'm sure that there's settings that you have to change.
Sure. I mean, he sort of wanted full C10 OLED settings, but I'll just point you to Arting's ratings because their settings that they've described in there are perfectly fine, other than the one key difference between their settings recommendation and mine is that they recommend not turning dynamic tone mapping on. Now, that's because they're measuring things and they want to have, objective measures that don't change based on the signal. And of course, dynamic tone mapping does change based on the signal, but I think it looks better. So I would recommend having dynamic tone mapping turn on. There is nothing complicated about it. It only exists if an HDR10 signal is being input. That's the only time you will see that setting available. It's either under the expert settings or the picture options. I think it's picture options. But you won't see that setting unless you are currently watching an HDR10 signal. So that might be what's throwing you if you're trying to set everything up beforehand. Just make sure you're actually playing something in HDR10. Go into your picture menu and go down to the picture options, and there will be a setting for a dynamic tone mapping. It's either on or off. And there is one other option in the C10, which is HGIG. That stands for the High Dynamic Range Gaming Interest Group. That only applies if you're using something like a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X. And if you watch my settings video, I don't recommend using it anyway. I recommend leaving dynamic tone mapping on, and that is the only setting. There's no levels to it or anything like that. So it's HDR10 only, put it on, and that's it. That's as much as you need to do.
All right. His Apple TV 4K settings are confusing him as well. If he turns on Dolby Vision, everything says it's in Dolby Vision, even YouTube. It's not as bad as he would have thought, actually, but that's not right. What does he need to do? And it's connected through a Marantz SR7011 receiver, so I'd like to know how that impacts the audio settings as well. Shouldn't impact the audio settings.
So yeah, this is the confusing thing about the Apple TV 4K. When you're setting the sort of default resolution and output, you actually, in this instance, it's one of the devices where you want to set it to the lowest common denominator. You want to set it to 4K SDR, because he actually mentioned, he's like, I tried setting it to 4K HDR instead of 4K Dolby Vision. He's like, yeah, that looks a bit better, but now it's HDR10 all the time. And it'll switch into Dolby Vision if it's a Dolby Vision signal, but it never switches to standard dynamic range. Yeah, you need to set it to the lowest as the default, 4K SDR, 4K standard dynamic range. And then in the match content section, you want to turn on both match frame rate and match dynamic range. And that way, if the signal's HDR10, it'll go into HDR10, but it'll go back to SDR once you're done with that. If it's Dolby Vision, it'll go into Dolby Vision, but go back to SDR once you're done with that. So yeah, confusion there. The audio settings, you actually can just totally leave it at automatic. When you connect it to an AV receiver, it'll be like, oh, hey, you've got an AV receiver that can handle Dolby Atmos. That's what I'm going to send you if that's what the signal has. Otherwise, the Apple TV 4K decodes all other forms of audio inside itself and sends out multi-channel PCM, but it does it correctly. If it's 5.1 Dolby Digital, you get a 5.1 PCM signal that comes out of the Apple TV 4K. If it's a 7.1 Dolby Digital Plus signal, it comes out as 7.1 PCM. So your upmixing still works properly. It's Atmos when it should be Atmos. It's 5.1 when it should be. So that works well if you just leave it automatic.
So you can tell right there, like, that the HDR, SDR, Dolby Vision stuff is all relatively new, because
I mean, the game systems aren't doing it right.
Yeah, the audio has been around for a long time, so they just have an auto
Right.
setting and it works.
Right.
And like only an engineer would sit down and say, okay, so what they need is some way of telling it what's the lowest common denominator, and we'll make that be the setting. And everybody's gonna be like, it says Dolby Vision, I want Dolby
Yes.
Vision. I click
Well, I mean,
Dolby
they
Vision.
even prompt you when you first plug it into a Dolby Vision capable display. They're like, do you want to activate Dolby Vision? And of course, everybody is going to say yes, like if they just bought
Yeah.
a new Dolby Vision TV, but then everything is stuck in Dolby Vision all the time, which is not what you
Yeah.
want. Yeah, confusing.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. So don't
That's the
worry.
way
Give it a couple of
That's
years.
the way the game
and
systems work too. So
I know.
stupid.
Give it a couple of years, and it'll just be
Or at
like,
least the
PlayStation
5 does.
auto. That'll be it. Dazz asks, what are our thoughts on subwoofer designs that use two drivers facing in opposite directions? Power Sound Audio has some models with this design. Are there inherent benefits or detriments? The inherent benefit. Well, it depends. Sometimes when you see two drivers facing in opposite directions, you're not actually seeing what you think.
Sometimes one is a passive radiator. Yeah.
Right, which means that as one goes out, the other one sucks in, and then vice versa. If there are two opposing drivers, there's usually going to be a passive radiator somewhere on that thing, or a port to allow air to go
the Power
in and out.
Sound Audio ones are genuinely two active
Sealed.
drivers in a sealed container, and both. So they both push out at the same time. They both pull in at the same time. Dual
The
opposing.
inherent benefit of having this is that you get more surface area
Sure.
for your drivers without having to have one big larger driver. It's not as much as you would think. You would think that by putting two 12s in there, you're suddenly, the 15 I think even has more surface area than two 12s. It's just or it's relatively close. I can't either, but it you know what I mean, you don't get as much as you think. By expanding the size of the driver, you get a lot more space than you would think. But so that's the inherent benefit. The detriment is, all the stuff that you would think, which is, you've now got two drivers that are creating essentially a vacuum inside. if it's a sealed design, when they're pushing out, it's really creating a lot of pressure. And then when it goes back in, it's compressing all that air that's inside that box already. A benefit of that is that it can go back to center. It wants to go back to center, basically, and it helps the driver stop a lot faster in theory. In practicality, in my estimation, a good subwoofer can be of any design. It can be ported. It can be sealed. It can have two drivers. It can have four drivers. It can have one massive driver. It can have a bunch of little drivers. It's all about how the designer, is capable of utilizing that design. And many many designers favor a specific design because they know they can make it work. And this is the same with speakers and anything else. So when you see a layout of drivers in any speaker, just tell yourself it doesn't matter. Because if the speaker designer is a good designer, even though it doesn't make sense to you, or maybe it makes a lot of sense to you, that's of zero consideration. A bad speaker can have a million drivers in it, and a good speaker can just have one. And it all depends on what that speaker was designed for and who designed it.
Yeah, so basically, like with the Power Sound Audio designs where their dual opposed ones are sealed, I mean, you got to have a massive amplifier in there because you're overcoming the actual air restriction of that contained volume of air inside the cabinet. But hey, if there's one thing Power Sound Audio can supply you, it's a massive amplifier. So, they designed it correctly for that. The one benefit outside of all the electrical stuff is supposed to be physically that because they're both pushing out and both pulling in at the same time, that you're supposed to get less mechanical vibration, less physical vibration versus a single driver that is, firing in and out and therefore physically shaking the cabinet that it's in. Now,
rocking it back and forth.
Yeah,
right?
it isn't always the case. I mean, people put the example of they put the glass of water on top of the subwoofer and say, see, it doesn't shake as much on the dual opposed design, but it's not as though they're suddenly completely stationary inert. They still produce some vibration.
Right.
Some of the worst ones can get canceled out that way, but I would still recommend having them decoupled from whatever surface they're sitting on. It's not a panacea for all mechanical vibration.
No.
There's still, tertiary movement as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it. There's not a particularly strong reason. One reason why in Power Sound's lineup it can make sense to choose one of those over the others is simply that you do get the dual sealed design as far as surface area and total output in a slightly more compact physical size.
Yeah, smaller.
Which, when you're dealing with Power Sound audio, they don't make anything small. So this is one way to make it slightly physically smaller and still have Power Sound levels of output.
Yeah. Power Sound audio. It's like, let's make something small. Yeah, let's do it 24 by 24. Right, 24. Wait,
that's right.
What?
Super compact for them.
It's compact. It only takes 3 people to lift it. All right, so he's got some updates here. This is Dazz still. He's getting the Emotiva XPA3 for his theater. Shouldn't have any more receivers, amps. Wait, shouldn't have any more receivers, amps might be getting close to clipping concerns. Wow, that is a very hard sentence to read and make it make sense. So basically, he's not going to have to worry about his receiver clipping because he's going to get an amp. Okay. Upstairs in his wide open room, his Vizio P-Series TV does have a variable volume output, so the SVS Prime wireless speakers can work even without a remote control of their own. He's still toying with the different speaker options, though. Quite a while back, we said that with his upstairs room being so open to the second floor up top, the kitchen at the back, and the stairs and the rest of the house to the right, that putting absorption panels literally anywhere could be a help. He pretty much has free reign of the theater downstairs, but upstairs, Drea,
his wife.
Yeah, it's got to be Drea, right, cares a lot more about the looks. So they looked at printed panel options, and she likes how they could have family photos printed on 2x2 panels. They'll mount them on the front wall above and around the TV where they already have photos and artwork hanging. That's a great idea. I'm actually trying to slowly, my wife is not somebody you can ambush with these things, so I've mentioned it to her and I'm kind of slowly working her up to the I want to get some printed panels. And because our kitchen now has no carpet in it and we're out of money, so we haven't bought new rugs and it's a little loud in there. So we recently said we care more about treating the back wall and side walls, but in his case, will treating the front wall be just as beneficial or still be beneficial? It will still be beneficial.
Yeah. When you're literally dealing with echoes, it will still be beneficial.
Anything's better than nothing. Yeah. All right, Brian. Brian says at the back of Brian's basement home theater room, he initially wanted a bar, but there isn't enough space, so he's just going to have a sink, a countertop cabinets, and a fridge instead. He had planned and wired for a 7.1.4 configuration. He didn't think the surround back speakers would be terribly important, so he pre-wired their connections up high, thinking they would end up above the cabinets and fridge on the back wall. But in his temporary setup, before anything on the back wall has been built or installed, he has surround backs on temporary stands, basically ear level, and he really likes them. He didn't expect to, but he does, and now he doesn't want to compromise their sound. He came up with an alternative layout for the cabinets and sink that would leave spots open in the upper cabinets for surround back speakers. But would they still be too high? He's willing to buy new speakers with a different form factor if they will allow him to keep the surround back experience he's gotten used to now. He's using all Paradigm speakers with mini monitor V7s as the surround backs currently. Any idea? So the old kitchen, well, like it's not really a kitchen, I guess, but the old thing that he had basically looked like a traditional sink in the center with cabinets up top and below, and then to the right of that is a full-size refrigerator. So this is a pretty big...
Yeah. I mean, those were just plans. It's not actually built there yet, but initially that was his plan. It was rendered out.
Right. So now his new, because the fridge was in the far right, the far right there. He's now moved the fridge in, put some cabinets to the right of that, put some cabinets to the left of it, with a sink to the left as well, and with 2 open boxes up high, basically, instead of. Cabinets up there.
He actually did mention in his email, just for our reference, that because of where the plumbing is actually located, the sink will probably be on the left. It won't be sort of centered in the counter. It'll be to the very left of this whole thing. If we're looking at the render, because of where the rough-in plumbing turns out to be, since we're just looking at renders. But I mean, yeah, right now in his temporary setup, before any of this, kitchenette type of stuff is built, before the fridge is installed or the sink or anything like that, that he has these surround back speakers that he just put on temporary stands. They're at ear level, and he's like, I really like the results there. So if I put them up high into these cabinets that are on either side of this built-in to the left and the right of the fridge at the back of the room? Is that going to be too high? Is he going to lose the current experience that he has with his surround backs?
Dude, I'm be honest with you. I would not reconfigure this whole kitchen for these speakers. I mean, you're talking about like lowering them by, if you just put them on top of
everything, as
cabinets,
was his initial plan. There's the space above the cabinets that are above the fridge, the space above the cabinets that are above the countertop and the sink. He was like, I can put them way up there, which is basically next to the ceiling. Versus,
I would you would lower them by like maybe 2 feet, and I don't think that that's enough to care about. I would leave the kitchen the way it was and put the speakers up high
and not worry about surround backs very much. That's Tom's
right
take.
It's not. I mean, I first of all, the new layout looks very strange.
Oh, really?
I'm not gonna lie. It's weird. It's weird not to have
a continuous counter.
Yeah, well, it's not that. I don't mind that so much, but just having the refrigerator sort of like offset from the center, and then it's kind of a weird layout that you've got here. And then you're losing like over. I mean, you're basically losing over half of the upper cabinets completely.
Right.
The ones that are on top of the refrigerator are always useless anyway, because you can never get up there without a ladder, and or get to the back of them at least without a ladder, and then you're completely losing the other ones for these speakers. I mean, I don't know. To me, I don't think that this makes enough of a difference. If that makes sense. If you were going to lower them down, to the bottom of where the cabinets would have been, I think that would have been better, I guess. But yeah, what do you say, Rob?
So I mean, this is tough because he found something that he didn't expect, which was really enjoying these surround back speakers while being able to hear them at ear level. I mean, is there a way that you can temporarily put them way up high and see what the experience is? Because I didn't notice that. He might have already tried that and just said, but it seemed like he just kind of plumped these down where they are. So I would definitely, before any of the cabinet stuff and all that is installed, temporarily get them up high where they might end up being and see how you like the experience with them up there high there, because it might not be so bad. You might be like, oh, I still have my surround back sounds. It sounds a little bit different than when they were at ear level, but I still like the way they are. So if that's the case, then yes, you can take your pick of cabinet designs, whichever one works for you. I mean, there is the option of potentially going with an on-wall solution. For example, Aperion Audio with their new Nova on-wall series has speakers that would match with your paradigms quite nicely. The price is not crazy, but you would need a place to mount them on the wall, which if they're going to the left and the right would kind of have to be that new design that you've got, and one of them might end up directly over your sink. I don't know if I'm crazy about that idea. So logistically speaking, I think your surround back speakers do need to be elevated from where they are presently. Give it a try, because I don't think you'll be super disappointed if you can angle them down. So give it a try. Yeah. Give it a try with them right up close to your ceiling and angled down, because if that works, you can do the same thing above your original cabinet design and just everything works. If they need to be lowered somewhat to get the effect that you want, you could go with your new design as long as you're happy with it.
You see, if I were going to, cause I still don't like it, but if you were going to change your design in order to accommodate these speakers and you really wanted them lower, I would just take your original design, move your refrigerator, swap your refrigerator and the cabinets that are right next to it, the two upper ones, put those to the side, and then mount the speakers underneath the cabinets at the height that you would want them to be at, like flush mount them underneath there somehow. And I mean, that may actually involve you drilling into them from above so that they are as flush mount as possible. I mean, you could put something in between them, some little piece of rubberized tape or, foam or something in between them to help, make sure that they're not vibrating against those cabinets. But I would do that before I would do what you have planned here. I don't think that this is enough of a difference. If you really like them low, I would just, basically move your refrigerator over one bay, swap the cabinets to the other side, and then mount those speakers underneath your cabinets. And
you can still use the Aperions there. The Aperion on walls can be mounted either vertically or horizontally. They've got the keyhole mount for either option. So yeah. All right.
That's what I would do.
I like that.
All right. Are we on B here? Oh, yeah. He bought and installed the 3 TVs at the front of his room during lockdown, so he didn't have any help with the installation. The studs are metal, so they are reinforced with a board to hold the weight of the TVs, but it turns out he should have installed that reinforcement board at a lower height. He has hung 2 55-inch TCL 6 series as low as they can go, and he wishes they could have been a bit lower. His primary TV is an 82-inch Samsung Q70, and not only would it have been mounted too high on the wall for his liking, but it is also simply something that he could manage on his own during lockdown. So he bought a TV stand. He doesn't use the TV stand to hold any other gear, as he has all of his gear out of sight in another room. The problem is what the TV stand has done to the sound of his Paradigm Studio Center speaker. It's big and rear-ported, and it sounded much worse than when it was just on a stand with free air all around it. He did his best by cutting out the back of the TV stand and pulling the center as far forward as possible, but he still has trouble understanding dialogue sometimes, and it wasn't like that before. Any suggestions? Let me scroll back up here and look at this system.
So yeah, it's kind of fun with these 3 TVs. Now, I mean, I don't know if he really could have mounted those 2 55ers any lower, because one of them is like above a tower speaker and looks like it's skimming the top of it. So
I know, I don't think
probably
I can go
planned it that
either
way. But yeah, it makes sense with the 82-inch television. That it just wasn't something he could mount single-handedly. That was really the impetus for this whole thing. But I mean, what I would suggest to you here is just go with one of the 3-in-1 stands. I particularly like the Transdeco one, which is available at Amazon. It's a little over $300, so it's not the cheapest thing. But what that gives you is a mount which, well, I've done it on mine. I've mounted them single-handedly, because you have the TV face down, you mount the thing to the back, and then you carefully stand it up. It can be done.
Right.
I did it with a 75-inch with a 75-inch Sony that's heavier than your 82-inch Samsung, so it can be done, and I'm not a particularly strong or coordinated guy. Yeah, and then in addition to that, Carl is one of our listeners. He just wanted to second the recommendation for that very same Transdeco mount. One of the nice things about it is that it has a shelf for your center that is open air all around it. So that'll get you back to the same type of performance that you had. Carl actually secured it under the Latitude Run brand name, which is how they sell it over at Wayfair for a slightly lower price. So you can look that up. Go over to Wayfair and check out the Latitude Run 3-in-1 TV stand. But it's a nice looking stand, and I can recommend that.
I wonder if the problem here isn't that it's just lower, that the center channel isn't just a little bit lower than it was before, and it's kind of firing into his knees a little bit more than it was before. I wonder if just angling it slightly,
it's like
just putting it
snug into the container for the
I know,
center.
that's what it looks like too.
That has a little to do with it too. I don't think that back cabinet is aiding you right now. It does seem like a problem to be overcome. So, I mean, again, the Transdeco stand is going to give you free air all around the center and raise it a little bit. So I think that's a pretty decent solution for everything that you want to do here.
Any of those open air, like glass stands that you could have gotten would have been a good choice here. I know at the beginning of lockdown in particular, a lot of things were very, very scarce. So, maybe now Christmas coming up, man. Ask for a new stand. All right, he says variable refresh rate. He doesn't have the Xbox Series X yet, but he plans to get one, and he has an Xbox One X right now. If he plugs it straight into the Samsung, he gets a VVR, variable refresh rate, VRR, sorry. But if he goes through his Denon X4400H receiver, VRR is grayed out. Any way to get it working through the receiver?
Nope.
I don't think so. Does that take HDMI 2.1 to make that work? Yeah, it doesn't have that, right?
No, the going through the receiver, it's the HDMI Forum version of variable refresh rate, and you're going to have an HDMI 2.1 receiver. Don't buy any of the ones that are on the market right now. They don't work. So, and they only have one input anyway. You can't use them as a switch on.
And next year they won't have DACs.
Yeah, right. Yamaha does have more than one input, but theirs don't work either. So don't buy them now. Wait a year. For the moment, plug it directly into your TV. That's the way to do it if you want VRR for right now.
Right. Sorry. Hold on a second. And that. Okay. eARC cuts in and out when he tries to use it. Samsung blames Denon. Denon hasn't replied with his equipment in another room fairly far away, and the HDMI cable buried in a wall. He can't rule out the cable being the problem. Anything he can do to get eARC working better? Oh man, dude.
Well, can you temporarily bring your AV receiver into your theater
into the room
and try it with a different cable to find out if it is the cable? Because in all likelihood, it's the cable. That said, so Samsung never supports DTS via ARC or eARC. I don't think that's...
So that might be part of the problem right there.
It could be if anything was to do with discs, but it wouldn't be if it's games. If he's talking about his Xbox One X, because of course that's the thing he wants VRR, so that's the thing he's probably plugged directly into his television, trying to use eARC to go back to his AV receiver, getting these dropouts, so it's conceivable that it would have happened trying to, say, play a Blu-ray disc on the Xbox One X. It can do that, but he's probably dealing with Dolby signals. So, yeah, I would test it out, temporarily bring the AV receiver and some temporary speaker wire, I guess. You plug it into your towers and see if it works, because it could be the HDMI cable, unfortunately. eARC, I mean, it isn't always the most reliable thing. And unfortunately, of course, you can't press the info button on your AV receiver and see any information, because the AV receiver is not feeding any video to your display at that point. You'd have to physically walk over and look at its front panel to see anything when you're going...
That's what kids are good for, man. You call them. You're like, okay, go sit in the room right there and tell me what it says. What does it say now?
You can't trust what they say, though, so you're going to end up walking over there and looking at it anyway.
I know.
So, yeah, there's a little bit of issues trying to troubleshoot eARC like that, though, but... I mean, it should work. My guess is it very well might be that HDMI cable, unfortunately. Might be pulling it through the conduit that's hopefully in there. Doesn't sound like it is.
I don't think so. He said buried.
Yeah,
He didn't say buried inside a tube.
Know.
So if you set the Xbox One X to output Bitstream Dolby Atmos, and you go into Dolby App, and then you go into the Dolby Access app and turn on upmixing, is that actually working correctly? It doesn't sound right to Brian. He tried writing to both Microsoft and Dolby. Haha, good luck. But neither seemed knowledgeable enough to answer his question. Dolby's response was particularly confusing. They said, audio may be slightly upscaled. Slightly? Slightly. But this does not convert non-Atmos audio to Atmos. Unfortunately, the Dolby Access application is only designed to be used with Dolby Atmos supported content at this time. What does slightly upscaled mean? Who knows? That's somebody hedging their bets. For his part, Brian has resorted to switching to Bitstream Dolby Atmos when it's actually Dolby Atmos content, but then just manually switching it back to regular Bitstream Dolby Digital for everything else, and letting his X4400H do the upmixing, which seems to sound way better. What are our thoughts? Yeah, so Microsoft sucks. Okay, let me just start with that, because we all know it's true, and for however many years the stupid console has been out, they have not been able to get audio correct.
Yeah, not quite right.
I have resorted, or I have decided that I just can't care anymore about this. I gotta be honest with you. I switched the Bitstream on, the Dolby Atmos on, and it told it to upscale and did all the stuff I was supposed to do. And then I just try very hard not to think about it.
Right.
As I'm watching things. Because, so we watched Over the Moon, which is a great family movie in the style of Disney Pixar, but not actually Disney. Or Pixar. It's made by a Chinese company, I think. But it was really good. And it definitely seemed to have Atmos going on, there. But I couldn't tell you for sure if anything else is being upscaled the way it's supposed to.
Right.
So I would, I think for a while, I had resorted to going to stereo.
Yeah, I did too.
Letting my receiver do all the work, and which was fine. But eventually, they said that they got it working correctly. I turned it on, and I just can't be chuffed to figure it out myself.
So I haven't looked at what the Xbox One is doing recently. I only have a day one Xbox One. I don't have a One X. So if there's any differences between the day one and the One X, I wouldn't be able to tell you anyway. But I have, of course, been playing around with the Xbox Series X. Now the Dolby Access app has changed. There is no more checkbox for whether you want to upmix or not upmix. It just always upmixes, whether you want it to or not. If you put it into Bitstream Dolby Atmos on the Series X, sound will always be coming out of your overhead speakers, but it never puts any sound into the surround backs unless it's actual Dolby Atmos content and has sound in the surround back channels. As an upmixer, it never puts any sound in the surround backs for some reason, which is different than the Dolby Surround Upmixer on your AV receiver, which will put sound into your surround back channels. So since he started this whole topic by saying how much he actually enjoys the surround backs, didn't expect to, but does, that could be one thing that you're like, hey, it sounds better when I just let my AV receiver do the upmixing. Well, it's putting sound into the surround backs. The Xbox version of the upmixing is not, at least on the Series X, and I don't know if it's the same on the One X, but you would assume that, well, can't assume, can we? But nevertheless, that is the way, at least on the Series X, I can confirm. So that could be it. I think you're actually doing the right thing. As someone who cares about it, and notices the difference, I think you are doing the absolute right thing of manually changing to Atmos when it really is Atmos content, and something else like 5.1 output of some kind. He's chosen Dolby Digital because that works via ARC through his Samsung, which makes sense. So yeah, I think you're doing the right thing. If I noticed and cared as you do, I would suggest that's the way to do things, unfortunately.
Can we all acknowledge the irony that Microsoft now doesn't put anything in the surround backs after many, many years when you put it in 5.1, your side surrounds
like, well, we'll fix this. There'll just be never any sounds with the surround backs.
Fine, Tom. You hate us? Right. How about you hate surround backs? Fine, we won't use them. Well, how about that? Are you happy now, Tom? I'm not.
The PlayStation 5 is it's either LPCM or Dolby Digital or DTS. There is no Atmos on the PlayStation 5. But you got to choose how many channels, and it's stuck there at all times. Yeah, neither of these of these game systems are the pinnacle of audio.
Can we all just say that releasing things that have to be patched immediately after release, that was never the internet has not made things better in that way. It used to be when they released a game console, if it didn't work, they had to recall them all. So they made sure that everything worked before it left. And now they're like, oh, we got to get out before Microsoft gets out. And Microsoft announces their date, and they're like, oh my God, and everybody's fighting to get out first. They're like, it's not done. We haven't tested everything. Don't worry, we'll fix it through firmware.
Yep. Well, you got to love like the retail package games where they got 1.2 gigabytes of data on the disc and then a 30 gigabyte download day one. Like, where is the game really coming from?
Yeah. All right, Infinite Gary. So the new Anthem AVM70 and the AVM90 Pre-Pros can both process 15 speakers. The 70 can process 2 independent subs. The 90 can process 4. But outside of that, they don't appear to have any big feature differences, yet the difference in price is huge. The one set of specs where Gary spotted a significant difference was signal-to-noise ratio, where the 70 claims 123 dB, while the 90 claims 140. And the total harmonic distortion plus noise, where the 90 claims 12 dB advantage over the 70. For their part, Anthem replied that the 90 is a considerably larger, or has a considerably larger toroidal. I can never say this word. Toroidal. I know how to say it. I just can't. Not the first time. Toroidal. Yeah. Yes. Power supply, upgraded DACs, upgraded ADCs, and hand-selected parts.
Always.
That part. It's like they went to the farmer's market of AV gear and went, ooh, this one's very nice. Let's put this one.
Gave him a sniff.
Sniffed it. Oh, this is a good one. You can tell. It smells fresh. They claim the differences will be heard in low-level detail and that you're paying thousands more for 5% more in performance. How audible are those sorts of differences? And since these are pre-pros, the external amps that are plugged into them have their own signal-noise ratio and the total harmonic distortion plus noise specs, don't they? So what is the relationship between signal noise and a total harmonic distortion of the pre-pros versus their external amps? First of all, the top-of-the-line one is more expensive because they have to have something that's more expensive.
They gotta sell it to that crowd. That crowd
needs to be able to say, I bought something better than the other one, and it doesn't have to be that much better. 5% is like way more than they are willing to pay.
It's kind of refreshing for them to just put it that way too. They're like, yeah, it's way more expensive for a tiny improvement. I'm like, all right, fair enough.
And these parts are no more hand selected than any other part. I would love to see that in action.
It is a different set of DACs, digital to analog converters, in the 90 versus every other model, the 70 and all the AV receivers. So yeah, I mean, and they are like, they're ridiculous. I think they were like 36-bit, 768 kilohertz capable DACs, which there aren't a ton of them. So yes, they are more expensive. Like the parts cost is genuinely more. You absolutely do not need it. I mean, there
No.
aren't even
Yes.
any signals to
I
play
agree.
at that bit rate and sampling, and even if there were, it would make no audible difference. But nevertheless, to purchase those parts and have 19 of them, or actually 21 of them, because there's Zone 2 in the thing as well, like,
Right.
that ups the cost. The bigger power supply, sure, but it's a pre-pro, not a... doesn't have any amplifiers built into it. Don't really need it. So, I mean, audibly, no, this isn't going to make any difference.
Yeah.
When you have a signal-to-noise ratio of 123 decibels, that means if anything is playing at 123 decibels, the noise is at 1 decibel at that point. That's what that means. So, I mean, even if you're playing 24-bit signals, like you're never going to hear it. Never. So getting it up to 140, I mean, yeah, objectively, sure, you can measure it. They're not lying if they make that claim, but it's just not an audible difference. That's not going to matter. So, they didn't bring out a new Anthem statement processor, right? The 90 is basically it. They just didn't give it the statement branding. So for the people who are coming from the Anthem statement D2, they're like, where's mine? Well, here it is. It's the 90.
There it is. Yeah. And, like Rob said, it's like, buying a car that has like real wood or real, real leather someplace, or, custom this or whatever. Is it any better of a vehicle than the one that's exactly the same but has plastic? Yeah, it's exactly the same. Everything underneath the hood is essentially the same. In this case, they bought more expensive parts that have more performance that you will never use.
Right.
So, they got a bigger power supply in it. Big whoop. Who cares? It doesn't do anything. So, and why are people buying it? Well, because they want to buy the best. And this is technically the best of what Anthem has. And probably better than anything else that's out there. And aside from, a few select pieces of gear. So,
now, as far as the connecting it to the external amplifiers, which of course you have to do being a pre-pro, now, I mean, there are pre-pros out there where you can find in the specs that the signal-to-noise ratio that they have is like 98 dB or 101 or 102 dB or something like that. And that actually can be audible. I mean, we certainly have signals that are going above 102 dB or above 98 dB. Now, if that's where you're starting with a signal-to-noise ratio like that coming out as your source signal, and that's now being fed into an amplifier, and maybe the amplifier doesn't have the greatest signal-to-noise ratio, you could actually get into a scenario where, yes, the level of noise becomes audible, particularly in very quiet passages, which is a little bit of what they were saying. There's some truth to what Anthem was saying about low-level detail is where the difference might be, but not when you're starting at 123 and going to 140. You're not going to hear it there. You might hear it legitimately if you were starting at 98 and then going to 120. There, you might, at the low level hiss, you might actually be able to hear something like that. So there's kernels of truth to what Anthem's saying. They're not objectively lying to you in those claims, but in terms of when you're starting at something that's already as good as the AVM 70, then making it even better isn't something your human ears are going to detect.
Curt has a go-ahead to turn a spare bedroom into a dedicated home theater. His budget is limited, so he's leaning heavily towards a BenQ 2050A for his projector. What all is involved when playing Ultra HD Blu-rays on a 1080p display like the BenQ? He wants Atmos and DTS-X soundtracks that are often only on the Ultra HD Blu-ray version. He already owns a Panasonic UB420 player and a Denon X1400H receiver. There's no problem, basically.
This is what Tom is doing.
This is what I do. So I'll tell you what you will experience almost certainly is you will notice that some things look weird that shouldn't look weird. And it's because they are initially they were filmed in H, or not filmed, but the original on the disc is in HDR. And you are not viewing it that way. So a lot of times I notice it in like the blacks. The black levels will be very strange. And sometimes, in particular on the Jurassic Park discs, the dinosaurs look super faker than they did on the original. Like they totally look plastic and CGI'd, where they never looked that way to me before. But on the 4K disc, they do look that way on watching it in SDR. But your projector will have no problems putting up an image. You just may see some slight inconsistencies from what you were expecting.
Now, we are dealing with HDR to SDR conversion. That's what's going on.
Right.
Which your Panasonic UB420 player will do. Like when it detects that you're connected to a 1080p SDR display, it will convert the HDR to SDR so that, yes, you get an image. But it doesn't give you any options to alter how that HDR to SDR conversion is done. Now, one of the reasons I pointed Tom at the time towards a Sony Ultra HD Blu-ray player is because they give you some minor control over the HDR to SDR conversion. And Tom, have you ever touched that control? Like,
I have not.
Yeah, so there you go. So technically speaking, is there such a thing?
I went through the settings with you when we first got this thing. We sat there and went through it, and I haven't touched it since.
That's the thing, because some.
Oh, I'm not doing that. Yeah. You've lost your mind. That's not happening.
Some movies is where you need to adjust it. All it really does is overall make the image a bit brighter or dimmer, because some, when you convert the HDR to SDR, they just look way too dark, and some look washed out, and you can adjust that on certain Ultra HD Blu-ray players. So that is one feature your UB420 doesn't really offer you. In Panasonic's lineup, only the 9000 does, and that's a $1,200 player. It was one area where the Oppo players, when they existed, excelled, was at converting HDR to SDR and giving you control over it. But then Sony's players are the other ones that give you some minor control over it. Is it going to be worth purchasing a whole new player? I wouldn't say so. Like Tom says, yeah, occasionally a scene here or there might look a little bit strange, but are you really going to go reaching for the remote anyway and start the movie over? Like, no, you're going to notice it and go, oh, well, that's what I'm dealing with, until you upgrade your projector to one that handles HDR10, and then it'll never be a concern again.
That's right. But since the cable in my wall almost certainly can't handle HDR, it's never happening. I told my wife the next time our next display probably won't be a projector. It'll probably go to a big screen. Justin, not Bieber, on Facebook. Justin ended up with two different projectors in his possession, a BenQ LH710 and an Epson LS300. Which of these two would we expect to be the better choice? He'll be using it in a room that doesn't have very good light control. He mostly wants it for movies and TV plus some games. I don't have a clue. I don't know.
So, I mean, there are two very different projectors, because the Epson LS300 is an ultra short throw. Whereas the BenQ LH710 is a standard throw, as in it'll throw a 100-inch image from 3 to 4 meters away. So completely different types of projectors. But that BenQ LH710 is a conference room projector. Doesn't even claim to do full Rec 709 color. They reference Rec 709 color, but they reference it at 92%. But the claimed as far as lumens and all that type of stuff, that's when it's in conference room mode. Aren't accurate colors or anything like that. Also, it mentions it as being 1080p, but it's actually 1920 by 1200 resolution. So you're always going to have black bars at the top and bottom, which are not very black on that BenQ. So the LS300 from Epson, I will just flatly say, it's the better of the two projectors for home theater purposes. Also, when you have a room that doesn't have very good light control, but you still want to use it, ultra short throw is a pretty decent way to go, as long as you pair it with an ultra short throw screen. And that's where this difference could be made. Now, he's basically said he's got both projectors in hand. I don't know what your plans were for getting a screen, but it will cost you more to get a ultra short throw compatible screen that will make the LS300 look its best versus the type of screen you could use with the LH710. So you have to take that into account. But if you get an ultra short throw screen to go with the Epson, it definitely will look better than this particular conference room BenQ projector. That's the answer there.
Right, but that screen may cost you more than whatever you paid for it.
Right.
So even though the Epson is quite a bit more expensive out of the box than the BenQ. The BenQ is like $1,100 or something like that, and the Epson's like $1,800. Yeah. So, just on price alone, you would expect this to be a better projector. But like Rob said, because it's the if you wanted to really take full advantage of the ultra short throw,
UST.
So bad. You're going to need the screen, the right screen for it, and that's going to be
interestingly.
Pricey.
I mean, the Epson LS300 and this BenQ LH710, they are both 1080p projectors, as in they don't do 4K. Right. But the LS300 can actually accept a 4K HDR signal. Can't really show it to you, but it will accept it and give you an image. So that's kind of interesting.
Right. Yeah. So he says the BenQ claims 4,000 lumens, but from 3 to 4 meters away from a 100-inch screen. The Epson claims 3,600 lumens, but it's the UST, because I can't say Ultra today, so it's only inches away from the screen. Do the UST projectors not need as many lumens since they're so close to the screen? I mean, I would take all of these luminal counts in a grain with a huge grain of salt.
Yes, especially if you try to wrangle that BenQ into somewhat accurate color, it won't be anywhere close to 4,000 lumens anymore. That's at full bore, as blue as it can be. Everything wide open. Yeah, maybe it'll hit 4,000 lumens. No. But yeah, the lumen count isn't really what we're worried about here anyway. In general, do ultra short throws need to have more or fewer lumens than regular standard throw? I mean, if they're intended to be used with the lights on, they typically come with more lumens than a standard throw projector that's meant to be in a dark room. The reason your particular BenQ has so many is because it's meant for a conference room where the lights are on and you're just trying to get anything visible for your PowerPoint presentation, because that's
no
really
one cares if the blues are blue when you're throwing up a PowerPoint presentation. No
Can
one
you
cares.
see whether the graph is going up or down for your business presentation? Good enough.
That's what you want. Yeah. Good enough. Christian adjusted the Technicolor HDR picture mode on his LG C8 OLED to be as accurate as possible for movies and TV. He got a PS5, so he figured he should use game picture mode for that, but the HDR game picture mode has very different looking colors. Could he just copy the settings he's made from the Technicolor HDR picture mode? What makes the game picture mode any different? This is almost certainly going to be one of those things where it's another article that we point people to
pretty
for
much,
this. Is that what's going to happen?
Particularly because, once the C9 and the C10 came along, they made it so that all the picture controls in all the picture modes, including game mode, were essentially the same. There might be one or two that are grayed out in one picture mode versus the others, but all the controls looked the same. Whereas in the C8, and then going back the year prior, the C7, the game picture mode had actual different controls. They didn't give you a color temperature control like all the other picture modes do, so you can't select between cool and warm. And they didn't give you a standard color control. What they gave you was this weird slider that went between like W something and I forget what the other side of it even is, but it basically controlled the color temperature and the color all in one weird slider, and I have no idea why that's what they chose to do in only the game picture mode, but there it is. The correct setting is W40, by the way. So what I will point you to are, again, Ting's settings for the C8, because if you were looking at any of the newer ones and being like, I can't even find these settings anymore, it has to be specifically that model year, the C8. They have the settings specific for game picture mode in addition to the other modes, so you can't just copy and paste what you did in the Technicolor mode, because the settings literally don't exist in the game mode. But they have the correct settings there, and it is all to do with that color temperature / color slider thing, which definitely makes everything look far too blue by default.
So does he need to have 4 different picture modes adjusted? Normal in game for SDR, normal in game for HDR? It sounds like it. It's like you need to. Sounds like you're going to need to plug these in all over the place, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, every time you get a new signal type, then the television will detect that, and it will change initially, the very first time, the picture mode on you. So you do need to go through every time you have a new signal type on each HDMI input, because it is input by input as well. Now, at least on the LG OLEDs, let's say you've put in an HDR game. So you have now adjusted the HDR game mode on the particular input that you're using. There is the option to say apply to all inputs, at least, which you do have to manually click. And now at least if you switch to another HDMI input on your OLED and then you select the game HDR mode, its settings will be the same between input and input. But if you then go to standard dynamic range game mode, it will not have the same settings as HDR game picture mode. You'll need to go through the settings again. So, yes,
it's all very convenient.
It's a tedious amount of setup, but you only have to do it kind of once. But yes, that's what you'll end up doing.
So lastly, he asks, is there a way to program his Harmony remote so that it will always switch the picture mode for his play video games activity, but then put the picture mode back to normal for everything else? I mean, you can't, in order to, so what Rob just said is it's going to switch your picture mode when it detects this new input type or signal type. It's not input type. But there's no way to program a Harmony remote so that it changes settings like within your picture mode back and forth, unless you program some sort of wacky macro, which will
then
go
you
up
would
and down.
Kind of have to like know the state it's already in, because just sending a series of button commands to open your settings, change the picture mode, if you already started where you wanted to end up, and then you put in all those button commands, you're not going to end up where you want to be because you were actually already there at the beginning of that sequence of button presses.
You would usually have to do something like something that you knew would reset the display. So which would mean that you would go, you have to power it off, then power it back on, and then select the input that you think it's going to be on, and then
unfortunately
do all
the
stuff.
LG menus wrap. So when you get to the end of the list and click right once again, it'll wrap around back to the beginning. So you can't even do the thing where you say, oh, just hit left a bunch of times and then you know how many times to hit right if you start at the beginning. No, it wraps around, unfortunately. So you can't even do your macros that way. Here's what I would strongly recommend to you, sir, because I'm pretty sure he said that he has a AV receiver like a Denon X30 something or other that has 2 HDMI outputs. I would suggest it is time to use your 2 HDMI outputs on your receiver and have one of them that goes to, HDMI, whichever HDMI has the ARC port. That's the one you're going to use for your movies and your television. And then use the second HDMI output to go to a different HDMI input on your C8. And that's your game input now. Because then you can leave that secondary HDMI input on your television always set to game mode. And when it goes to an HDR game, it'll automatically kick into HDR. But if you've set it to be game mode every time, it'll remember that on that input. Because that's pretty easy to do on your Harmony, right? If you say, okay, I'm going to play a game, it sends the command to go, okay, use the second HDMI input on the C8. And you can...
This is all very convenient, by the way. I just love it.
But to do the thing he wants to do, though, this is the workaround.
I know. I'm not blaming you.
This will actually work. His C8, it doesn't do variable refresh rate or 4K 120, so we're not worried about putting your PS5 through an AV receiver because it's all HDMI 2.0, everything that you're using here. That's how I would tackle it. I'd use two separate HDMI inputs. One of them is always set to the game mode. The other one is always set to your, in his case, Technicolor mode, which is a perfectly fine one to use for movies and TV. As for the difference on your C8, there is a difference in lag, and that is exactly why you would want to use the game picture mode for games. The latency is lower on that. On the C9 and the C10, they put a separate setting apart from everything else that they call instant game response, which can be applied to any picture mode. Therefore, your ISF or Technicolor, it doesn't have Technicolor anymore, but your filmmaker mode on those ones or your ISF mode could be your game mode. The latency could be just as low on any picture mode if you activate instant game response. But your C8 doesn't have that. You actually do want to use the game mode.
I can tell you right now, I'm going to get seriously over all these PS5 and Xbox One X or Xbox Series X questions very quickly because we're on to more of them.
It's the week that they came out, man. Of course it's going to
I know. I'm biting my tongue. Hard, very hard, but hard enough. Aidan asks, on the PS5, you can adjust how the console outputs HDR on a system level, but then individual games also provide their own HDR adjustment. What do we recommend as the best way to handle that? Rob?
So, as I mentioned in my settings video, I recommend not touching any of them and letting your TV handle it, because it's just a mess. If you
for now, so if you're listening to this in the future and you're like, wait a second, that's not the way it works. Yeah, we know. Okay, look at the date on the podcast before you start commenting, jerk.
So the system level one is supposed to be the whole HGIG, the high dynamic range gaming interest group thing. Not all games make use of it. As you mentioned, some of them have their own adjustments, and that overrides what was done on the system level. But if you adjust it on the system level, now your apps, like your video streaming apps, they don't look right anymore. So my honest advice is don't even touch the system level one. leave it alone, because most games don't even use it anyway, and if you do adjust it, your video streaming apps don't look right anymore. So forget that thing. If you want to adjust it on the game-by-game level, because, hey, I'm playing this game now, and it always looks a bit too dim to me, or it always looks a bit washed out for me, by all means, go ahead and change it there inside of that game, because it'll only apply to that game. But I would recommend at this point, in November 2020, don't even touch the system level one.
Okay. For Xbox Series X, how do you get VRR, or variable refresh rate, working along with an AV receiver?
You can't.
When he gets a new receiver, all right, no, you can't do it right now. He gets a new receiver in 2021. Will it work? In theory, yes.
We're hoping so.
It should.
That's the hope.
The current models only have one HDMI 2.1 input, correct?
Denon and Marantz. Yamaha has
Denon
more.
and Marantz, but not Yamaha has more, yeah. Can VRR work if you plug the Xbox straight into the TV and then use eARC to send the audio back to the receiver? Well, that's what people are trying to do, and they're complaining about eARC not working correctly. So,
I mean, I've had plenty of instances so far with the two things when I've been trying to use eARC where the center channel just disappears. It's gone. You still get sounds coming out all the other speakers, but the center channel, where maybe characters are speaking, is just gone. Just gone. Now, turning the AV receiver off and back on again usually works, but, sometimes it just disappears. So it's a glitchy mess. But for the time...
I'm telling you, man, eARC is just... that's like the bastion of the last resort.
No, I mean, you know what? On the PlayStation 5, which doesn't do Atmos, what I've resorted to there is Bitstream Dolby Digital output for everything. That works. It works. My center channel doesn't disappear. That one works.
Oh, this half-baked consoles is so great.
So that's what I've resorted to there. I leave my Xbox Series X on Atmos output, which so far has, sometimes the center channel disappeared. Turn my receiver off and back on again. Fun times.
So any projectors now are on the horizon that will support VRR? I haven't heard of any.
Haven't heard of any. No.
Yeah, no, not yet. Well, I mean, I don't know. Honestly, using a projector for gaming is, again, if you're serious, I don't know who's a serious gamer that listens to this podcast, but if you're a serious gamer, the input lag on projectors, like, it used to absolutely kill me on Rock Band and Guitar Hero and that sort of thing. You never really realized how bad the lag was until you had to sync up those instruments, and it was just atrocious. You're like, oh my god, is it really this bad?
And the answer is they're like 23 milliseconds, which is a far cry from the single digits you're getting on some of the TVs now, but it's still a lot better than when it was 100.
So he says he has a Sony X900F in his garage.
Yeah, that's what he put. I think he means the 49-inch 900F. I think because I'm not aware of an X4900F, so but that's what he wrote. So I think he means the 900F in the 49-inch size.
All right. So when it goes into HDR mode, it looks incredibly dark. His LG B9 OLED looks way brighter. Is that to be expected? It is if your settings aren't correct.
Yeah,
that's what would be my
guess.
In
a word, no. Do you perchance still have the power saving setting on?
Yeah,
by
could
default,
be, right?
It's on, and that's what happens. Everything looks crazy dark if you're power saving stupid thing. To get that Energy Star rating, by default, it's got to have power saving mode on.
To be able to be sold in California, probably as well. Yeah, a lot of times these TVs have to meet a certain energy consumption rating, or they can't be sold.
So that's kind of my suspicion that. I don't know if it could be anything else. He said he's put his brightness slider all the way up to 100, which is the backlight setting on most others, but Sony has relabeled it brightness and turned what is traditionally called brightness into black level, which is the correct name, but it just makes everything confusing. But yeah, he said he put that all the way up and it's still super dark. I'm like, that doesn't sound right. That sounds to me like you got the power saving on. But once again, I'll point you over our things, go over through their X900F settings and make sure everything matches.
Right. Dan, how much time we have?
We've got a half an hour left.
Dan has heard us recommend APC's surge protectors, and we've mentioned the P8V and P4V as good options for home theater because they let through the full 15 amps. Excuse me. But what about PC Essentials line of surge protectors, the PE3 and the P6W in particular? Do they let through the full 15 amps? How can you tell? They usually will say something in there.
Yeah, they usually have a line voltage, which will either say 12 amps or 15 amps. Sometimes they have an output voltage spec, particularly in the battery backup ones will typically have an output voltage spec. But yeah, just in the list of specs there, it usually says line voltage. in, and yeah, those ones are fine. They're very general surge protector units. They do let through the full 15 amps. Where the difference is, you're like, why is the P4V slightly more expensive than the PE3 or the P6W? What's the difference there? It's about the IEEE let-through voltage. The P4V actually has the highest rating that IEEE rates, which is it won't let through more than 300 volts during a spike, whereas the other ones in the Essentials lineup will allow as much as 500 volts through in a spike. So that's the difference. That's what you're paying the about $20 more for with the P4V.
All right. So the P4V has a sort of form factor he would like, since it sits quite flush against the wall outlet, but it looks like it's maybe being discontinued. Is there an alternative with the same form factor we would recommend? It's still on sale over at
B&H. Yeah, I included the link because
it's $35, dude. That's pretty expensive for 4 outlets.
It's a good protector though. It has a coaxial in and out tube on the bottom of it. Don't show it in the picture, but it does. So Amazon has it out of stock, so maybe I'm suspecting maybe that's where it was looking. I don't know if it's being discontinued. A lot of APC products are under refresh right now, so since you can still get it at B&H, just check that out, because if that's the form factor you wanted and that's the performance level you wanted, you can still get it. APC will have something. They're refreshing their lineup right now, so
right. That's what we think. We don't know, but it's what it looks like. They're refreshing their lineup, and that's why all the home theater stuff has kind of gone away. But there's no way they're getting out of this game.
They've moved everything into their gaming department. Everything that used to be audio video, it's all in their gaming department now. Yeah.
Which is good marketing for sure. Amelia. First up, Amelia says, "Thanks for all the help." I don't recall helping you.
It was just last week. Self-powered monitors, everything plugged into the subwoofer, and then the subwoofer fed all via XLR cables.
Oh, right, that thing. Okay, sorry, Amelia.
Spent like 45 minutes on it, dude.
It's not that you're not memorable. It's that I'm dumb and also old with a failing brain and apparently failing body, too, after that climb last night. Jesus. All right. So next, the ELAC surround speakers we suggested are the perfect size for where she wants to put them. They've been ordered. As a bonus, she gets to instruct her boyfriend to climb into the attic to run the speaker wire for them. Hey, it's not nice. At least you waited until it got cool. Because I've installed speaker wire in Florida in August. And let me tell you, that was not fun. Okay, she's happy to continue using the bag end PM6 self-powered monitors as front, left, and right speakers. The giant RCA to XLR cables aren't an issue at the front of the room, and there is something satisfying about the solid click that the XLR connections make. But she's leaned towards getting a third self-powered PM6 as a center, even though it costs more than the passive M6 version. She prefers the idea of having them all perfectly match. It's fine.
Absolutely fine.
She did run the auto setup in Odyssey just with the 2 speakers and 2 subwoofers for now. And as Tom wanted, the Denon did set the levels to plus 12. As I warned, the Denon did set the levels to plus 12. It yelled at her to turn up her subwoofers before it started. That part never did turn green, but it still let her proceed. After all that, the volume dial still needed to be up pretty high. It all works. It sounds great, but the levels and volumes are turned up high, as we said, was to be expected. Should anything be done about that? What?
So remember, these are the professional studio monitors. They only take the...
No, I'm confused about the format of the thing.
So
it looks like another question's coming.
It isn't. This is in answer to what she just said. We had a listener who heard all this, and he came in and responded. So we can give Chad's response now.
Okay, so Chad heard us discussing Amelia's setup last week, and his ears perked up because he also has bag end PM6s and Infra Sub 12 for his desktop setup, and he's willing to sell one of his speakers to you for the low price of
doesn't sound like it.
He typically changes gear often, but he kept the bag ends for 12 years now because they're that good. So he had some helpful tips. He's used a similar setup, RCA outs from a receiver into XLR inputs of the bag end sub and speakers. He recommends Rolls Pro Match. Okay, that's $56 at B&H Photo. It's an easy way to convert consumer-level RCA to professional-level XLR, or vice versa. Amelia would need 2 of them, though, if she gets a third PM6 to use as a sensor. So what this does, it ups the voltage, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it takes the negative 10 dBV signal of consumer level, so that's what's coming out of your Denon right now, out of its pre-outs, the RCA connections, and it'll convert that to the 12 decibel louder plus dBU signal via XLR outputs. outputs. So there's RCAs on one side of it and XLRs on the other side of it. You can go either direction, but of course you'll be going from RCA to XLR. Now, that's actually going to mean you need different cables than Amelia has right now. You'll need now RCA to RCA because you're going out of the Denon into this Rolls device.
Which you almost certainly have someplace in your system.
Somebody's got some red and white cables somewhere.
That's right.
Just ask any of your neighbors. Somebody's got a box of red and white.
I'm sure you've got them in a drawer. We all have that drawer. I mean, if you're me, you've got boxes, but if you're a normal person, everybody's got that. Like my parents have a drawer that like all the extra AV cables and remotes and stuff goes into. So look in there. You've got some RCA to RCA.
And now actually we know she already has XLR to XLR that were presently going from the subwoofer to the PM6s. Now they'll just go from this Rolls device's XLR outputs to the PM6s. Done and done.
Right.
So really you just need some red and white RCA cables. It should not cost you anything. Somebody's got those. But yeah, slightly different connection path. But since during the auto setup, it did crank the speaker level as high as it'll go to plus 12 and the subwoofer output level to plus 12 as well. Having this for everything now, this actually works out pretty nicely because what you can do is get two of these Rolls Pro Match devices. One of them will be for your front, left, and right speakers. Great. Turn those RCA pre-outs into XLR. And then you'll use the second Rolls Pro Match, one of them for the subwoofer output, because it's an RCA subwoofer output out of the Denon. You'll turn that into XLR to feed your bag end sub. And the other one can power your center, because you said you wanted to get a self-powered center as well. So it'll actually make use of all four channels. Nothing will be going to waste, and it kind of, justifies the price.
Or you can not get that self-powered center, get the one that's powered by the Denon, and
yeah, but she still needs this boost for the subwoofer too, because the subwoofer is set to plus 12. That's not great.
Yeah, I'm wondering about that. Okay. Chad also clarified that back-end subs do have their own level control. It's independent of the XLR outputs that feed the speaker, so you can adjust the volume of just the subwoofers, even if you don't use the Denon subwoofer output. But of course, you'd have to turn the dials on the back-end subs themselves rather than changing a setting in the Denon. And lastly from Chad, the external box with the lights is indeed for monitoring purposes in the studio. The back-end subs will actually play down to 8 Hertz, but of course they can't remain perfectly linear all the way down that low. So a filter below 20 Hertz does get applied as necessary in order to protect the sub. There's a light on that external monitoring box that will actually glow brighter and brighter the more filter that is applied. Well, that's helpful, I guess. Very cool and helpful for studio purposes, but you don't need to connect it for home theater playback. So there you go. So if it's applying a lot of boost to your subs, that means that, if you can adjust the subwoofer on the volume on the subwoofer itself, you should be able to turn this up and maybe get to where you're supposed to be going with the sub as well.
Like she already did, right? In that initial part of Odyssey where it tries to get you to set your subwoofer's volume level before it even starts the chirps. She's like, it never turned green. She turned the volume dial on the subwoofer itself all the way up, never turned green. You can still proceed by just saying ignore. But even after the subwoofer's volume dial was turned to maximum, it never turned green, and it set it to plus 12 in the speaker trim level. It just means the signal level is too low, which, as we mentioned, to be expected with pro-level gear. So I think having those Rolls Pro Match devices and turning the RCA consumer level output into the proper professional level XLR signal level, totally justifiable. You're gonna, by getting 2 of those Pro Matches, you'll have 4 inputs and 4 outputs. That matches to your 3 speakers, and you only need 1 subwoofer signal. The second physical subwoofer she has is connected as a slave to the first subwoofer, so you just need the 1 output.
Make sure you turn down the knobs on everything.
Oh yes, yeah.
before you start playing anything
on your self-powered stuff.
On your take all the knobs down at least 50%.
Oh yeah.
I might even go lower than that.
Otherwise, you're gonna
once you buy these boxes. She asked where to put the 2 subs. Amelia was thinking one in the back corner that is open, and I don't know what that means, and one in the diagonal opposite front corner. Oh, that's open. Okay. She could stack them, but most of the photos she's seen have had 2 subs both at the front of the room. She really doesn't have the space for that on the front wall. What do we say? We say welcome to the podcast. It's glad that you start listening now, because we haven't talked about this very much recently, I suppose. But yeah, we don't know exactly your room, because I don't think she's told us, right? We haven't seen pictures of it or anything, so we don't know her room. But in a rectangular enclosed space, you want your subs to be placed mirrored to each other. So if there's one sub in the middle of the front wall, you want one sub in the middle of the back wall. If it's in the middle of the left wall, you want one in the middle of the right wall. If it's in the front left corner, you don't want it in the back left corner. You want it mirrored. You want it in the back right corner. So if you can place them, and this is a rectangular room, as I'm hoping it is, then what you have suggested is exactly the right way. Now,
totally
you've seen pictures.
Went into exactly what we would, so we're not even, no arguments. Hooray.
No arguments from us. The women's intuition here or something. But yes, you've seen a lot of pictures of subs at the front of the room. There's two reasons for that. One reason is it's very hard to take a picture of two subs when one's at the front and one's at the back of the room. It's very hard to take that picture, and subwoofer manufacturers would very much like to see you buy two of their subs because then they make twice the money. And that's one of the reasons, is that, it just is easier to photograph dual subs that way. But there's a lot of people who still subscribe to the belief that your subwoofer should be at the front of the room. And Matt, we have shown and talked about extensively on this podcast the reasons why it is that your subs should not be that way. They should be placed in a mirrored orientation, as I just suggested. There's a lot of research that involves a lot of math, and while I'm not suggesting that you not go out and look at it, it's all available. You can go see it. It's the Harman white paper that we talk about all the time on this podcast. I have started to read it a couple of times and just gone, okay, well,
you know the conclusion, so.
I know. I just want the conclusion. Can I just get to that? There's a lot of math involved. There's a lot of testing they did, real world, and about a lot of mathematical modeling they did, and they tested it in real world situations. And you could stack them. I would not recommend it. It would get you more output, but you don't need it. So I would just place them exactly the way that you were suggesting.
Yeah, thankfully, the way you wanted to place them is exactly where we would have recommended placing them, when these are the available spots that you have. So it all worked out swimmingly, and you don't even need to worry about, definitely don't worry about the photographs you've seen. It's done for, people like symmetry. It looks symmetrical when you do it that way. It's not the best performance. Your suggestion is better. So yeah, one at the front, one at the back. Perfect.
All right. So this room with the back end speakers is her library. And now I'm picturing this massive room with like those ladders that slide across, so that you could. Yeah, come on, let me envision this. It's all marble floor and stuff. Anyways, and she's wondering if she should get a projector for a very movie-like experience. She recently got a new TV for her living room, and she kind of hates how bright it is. During the day, it's okay, but at night, it's awful, especially Netflix and HDR. Why do people online seem to want it so bright? Isn't that strange?
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Yeah. So is it just a matter of turning down the backlight, or would a projector be more like a movie theater, which is what she wants for this setup? She's fine in paying a few $1,000s, but she'd rather not have an actual screen taking up the front wall. She'd be fine painting the wall white. And could the projector go on a shelf at the back wall? Well, there's a whole bunch of questions here. So almost certainly you have your TV in your living room. My guess is that you have it in a default mode and have not changed the settings on it. And if you have not, and you still don't like it, then yes, you can adjust the backlight and some of the other things that Rob is going to suggest. But if you have not gone into the settings and made some adjustments, usually all you have to do is find the Cinema Dark or IFS or ISF.
Imaging Science Foundation.
Set movie mode, something like that, one of those, and put it in that, and you're 90% of the way to having it properly calibrated. If it's still too bright for you at that point, or you have already done that, then yes, you can adjust the backlight or whatever you want. As far as having a projector in this room, I mean, to me, it's more about how far away you're sitting from the screen. So we don't know the size of this room. I'm now thinking it's a massive library, like at least, 50 feet by 120 feet. So, a projector would be necessary in a room that size. If it's a bedroom or something smaller like that, then the projector might be overkill. So what you really want to know is, how big of a screen do you want? How big of a field of view do you want for that cinematic experience? So most of the time, there's THX recommendations, there's ISF recommendations, there's all sorts of recommendations. I like around a 40-degree field of view. And, you can kind of figure this out, using simple math. But if you were one who likes to go to a movie theater back in the day and you kind of know where you like to sit in relation to the screen, you can kind of guesstimate what size, what kind of field of view that you would get. I like to sit, a third of the way in the room from the back wall. So if you take the back wall and I sit about a third of the way into the room there, that gets me about a 40-degree field of view-ish, and that's what I like. So to get that, in my theater, I need about a 90-inch screen. That requires a projector. But if I was sitting closer, or if I moved my screen closer, then I could have a 70 or 77-inch screen, which is what I'm planning on getting when this projector dies. I will move the screen closer and get the same field of view. So it's really about, what's most cost effective for that field of view. I would not recommend painting the wall white. If you're going to do that, and you're willing to spend a few $1,000s, I would get a retractable screen, a tap tension retractable screen. Have it drop down from the ceiling and then in front of whatever it is that you're doing. Now, again, this pushes the screen closer to you than it being on that wall. It also allows you to have stuff on the wall, and then this thing just kind of drops down in front of it, which means you can buy a physically smaller screen and still get the same field of view. All these things are things that you can consider, but we can't tell you what to do until you tell us what kind of, how close you're sitting to the screen and what field of view that you like. So all of these are
unless
options.
your room is very strange, you almost certainly can't have a projector on a shelf on the back wall. So that is certainly a viable setup option as far as that one question.
Did you say can't or can? Oh, yes, I do have a projector on a shelf on my back wall.
But yeah, I'm in agreement that if you don't want the screen always visible, which I understand, if this room isn't dedicated to being a theater, then yeah, a retractable screen would be the way to go there, and that's something you could definitely look into. So, but mostly her complaint was about just how bright the new TV in the living room is. Supposed to be this wonderful 4K HDR TV, and here it is just glaring at you, which I totally agree with. Even if you go to, say, the cinema picture mode, or maybe it's the movie mode, or it's the ISF mode, or even filmmaker mode, all of them by default, if your room is dark, are too bright pretty much at all the time. And yes, it is as simple as lowering the backlight control. For example, on my Sony Z9D, when I'm in darkness watching movies, I have the backlight turned down to like 6. It goes from 0 to 100. I have it turned down to like 6 because in the dark, that's a comfortable amount. It can get crazy eye-searingly bright. I totally agree with you. I have no idea why so many places are all like, oh, it's awesome. It made me squint. I can barely see. I'm like, that's not enjoyable to me. Crazy town. But it is quite common because you're like, during the daytime, it's not too bad. It is quite common to have a daytime picture mode and a nighttime picture mode, because nighttime, when it's dark, you do want a different picture mode, and that backlight setting is going to be lower. Now for HDR, because she's like, the worst of it is Netflix and HDR. And I mean, there are different HDR picture modes. There is the option to lower the backlight in HDR as well, because it'll automatically be pegged at 100. So yeah, the option is there. You can definitely lower that backlight setting if you want to. HDR might not look as HDR-ish if you lower that backlight setting, but if the problem is that it's making you squint and it's just uncomfortable, then yeah, you can adjust that there. So if it turns out that this is actually a very small room that you're in, and a picture screen size of 75 inches or something is going to be ideal for what you want, it might not necessarily make to get a projector in that scenario, just because you wouldn't really be taking advantage of what a projector can do, and you can adjust the television to not be so crazy bright.
Right. So once we find out the size of your room and how far away you're sitting, we can give you some recommendations for different fields of view. And like Rob said, I think the biggest advantage of projectors is that you can get a big picture for a lot less money than you would get with a direct view TV, like, a flat panel television. But once you get down to like, 80, 75 inches, if you're in that range, well, you might as well just get a 77-inch or a 75-inch TV and save money, because it will be cheaper, and it's easier to get the things like 4K and HDR and Dolby Vision, all that stuff that you might want. That would be cheaper than buying a projector. But if you're really wanting the projector experience, there's no reason that you can't get a small tab tension screen. Yes. It's just going to be a lot more expensive than you think, because they make a number of different sizes that are standard.
92 is about the smallest standard size.
Right. So once you get, if you decide you still want to have the screen and you want it to be smaller than 90 inches or 92 inches, as Rob was suggesting, you suddenly have to go custom, and that skyrockets these prices. So just be aware that that's kind of what's going to happen.
If we can get through
we'll do
more
one more
questions, that'd be great. They're both short.
We'll see. Bastian and John. I guess John lives in England, so cheerio or whatever it is you guys say over there. I don't remember. Bastian wants a new 65-inch TV. He's not a gamer, so that is of no concern. It's a living room setting, now a dedicated theater, and the room is never dark while watching in there, not even at night.
Oh, so that should be not a dedicated theater. I typoed.
That's okay. Not a dedicated theater. Sorry. He was still thinking OLED, but is it worth it? The CX is the most popular OLED model right now, but what about the BX or maybe the C9 or B9 from last year if they're cheaper? Any cheaper alternatives to an LG OLED that we would recommend?
We can keep going.
I thought the Oh, I can keep going? Okay. John is in a similar situation, except he already owns a B7 OLED. His concern is that he can see some mild image retention. It looks like it's from the ticker that runs across the bottom of the screen during news and sports. It's really only visible with a red or yellow background, but now that he's seeing it, he cannot unsee it. Should he take a chance on another OLED? Are the CX models better in terms of image retention now? Or should he consider the Sony XH95, which is the X950H in the US, which is an LCD and also costs less? Okay, so image retention on OLEDs has gotten better the more recently, the more recent model. So if you have an older model and you're seeing a little bit of image retention, to me that suggests that you're really not doing that much watching of those things that it would also image retain on the newer models. So I think that you could probably be okay going a newer OLED. That being said, I would not blame you one bit for going with a Sony LCD in this case, just to make sure that you are you're not having to worry about that, because the Sonys are very, very good. And in Bastian's case as well, with the LCD, you don't have to, you can get it to be as bright as you want it to be in a room that you don't have light control, and it's not a dedicated theater. So in both these cases, I would be happy to recommend the Sony or an LCD TV for these applications.
Yeah, it's it's a little bit tricky because, of course, so no LCD looks as good as an OLED in every circumstance. So the newest OLEDs, they are better when it comes to the image retention, but we basically know for a fact at this point that that's down to the processing, because Vizio brought out their very first OLEDs this year. They're using the same OLED panels as LG's C10s, but they're suffering worse image retention than LG's are. It's their first go at it. This is LG's seventh go at it, and they've improved the processing in behind and their image retention mitigation measures. They've got the thing now that tracks if there's any static images on the same part of the screen for a long period of time, and it'll dim that portion of the screen. It'll dim the whole screen overall a bit, but it'll dim that portion of the screen even more. The Vizios don't have that type of thing yet. They're pretty good at the pixel orbiter, moving things around so that nothing's stuck in the same place all the time on the LGs. So they've improved on that front. For John's case specifically, I wouldn't be too worried about getting a brand new OLED. Will any LCD look as good as your B7? Not in every respect. If your number one concern, and this will be for both Bastian and John, if your number one concern is the inkiest looking black levels and really inky looking black bars at the top and the bottom, if you're watching a CinemaScope movie on it, then Samsung will come closest. Samsung does the best job of particularly the black bars at the above and bottom, keeping them truly black, and making black look as black as it can be on an LCD without very much blooming around small objects. But as a result, on the Samsung LCDs, if you're, say, looking at a star field, there'll be some stars that are just gone. Because in order to avoid blooming, and in order to keep the black looking black, they'll just dim the stars to the point that some of them become invisible, whereas they're clearly visible on the OLED. Sony is almost the opposite. Sony does their very best to retain all the detail in the image, all the shadow detail, all the highlight detail. They try to retain it all, but as a result, the black levels typically look dark gray. And the black bars at the above and below, if there's, say, a bright object that's close to one of those black bars, it'll bleed right into that black bar and turn the black bar gray on a Sony, whereas the Samsung will dim the bright object to keep the black bars black. So are any of those compromises that you want? No right or wrong answer, but an OLED doesn't make any of those sacrifices. And for like Bastian's case, that would be why you would get an OLED. If you're like, I want the black bars black all the time, I want all the stars visible all the time, I want a bright object right next to my black bar without any blooming. It's like, well, only OLED can do all of those things all at once. Could you go for a B10 or a C9 or a B9 if they're slightly less expensive than the C10? If you're not a gamer, absolutely. There's like no reason to I mean, all of those are still good gaming displays, just not quite as up to date as the C10 is. But there's virtually no reason to pay more if the C10 costs more. However, there's been a lot of sales on C10s lately that have made them like less expensive than the C9 that might still be available from last year. So whatever is the cheapest of any of those, B9, C9, B10, C10, whatever's the cheapest, by all means go for it.
All right, really quickly, Alex. With the Focal Little Birds discontinued and all gone, what's the replacement? I've got a pair. You want one? I've got a pair. It's just sitting over there.
Yeah, you're not using yours anymore.
I'm not using mine
Yours
anymore.
are the birds, though, right? Not the little birds.
Well, they're not the little birds. Yeah, they're the birds. Focal Dome looks like they're a completely different series, and they're way more expensive. And Accessories for Less doesn't sell them. Are there any other tiny satellite speakers that can be wall-mounted that we would recommend? So I while Rob was... and I went over to...
Thanks. I'm so appreciated in my time.
I'm sorry. You know I don't mean it, but it's so funny to say. So I went over to Accessories for Less and was looking. They have a lot of Canton speakers over here, and I haven't heard any of these speakers, but they actually make like a Dolby Atmos looking
wedge-shaped thingy?
The wedge-shaped thingy, like the Prime speakers. But there's also a couple of offerings from Kef that are no, it's not Kef. There's a Focal offering that's the SIB XL. It's a 5-inch two-way. It's $150. I think that's each. And they're like a long, thin speaker, but they come with stands that are both short and tall, and then, or maybe they're compatible with stands. I can't quite tell if they come with them or not. But they're you can wall mount them either vertical or horizontal, they're not tiny.
No. Well, I mean, the thing was, even the little birds weren't nearly as tiny as you might have thought by looking at the images. Because
when the birds came, I was like, "This is a small speaker."
I mean, the birds were, they're a bookshelf speaker basically. The little birds were smaller, but it was still a 4-inch driver with a tweeter separate from it. So when you look at it, it looked like maybe some little 2-inch cube thingy, but it wasn't. It was bigger than that.
Yeah.
The SIB,
and this thing is very big, but it's
the SIB isn't small.
It sits flush to the wall.
Right.
It's not. It's long and thin, so it's not very deep, I guess, is the way I would describe it. So it's like 19. It's almost 20 inches, but it's only like just over 4 inches deep. So it sits really close to it can sit really close to the wall, depending on how you wall mount it. So, but when we're talking about surround speakers, when we're talking about surround back speakers, when we're talking about Atmos speakers, Canton is probably their speakers are probably a good enough speaker. Most of the stuff I've heard from Canton has been unoffensive. Yeah, I will describe it as such. I never heard a Canton speaker and thought I thought it sounded bad or in any way. So, I would have no problems if it were me. If I were ordering for myself, I could go to Accessories for Less, look at their Canton speaker, pick one that looked like it would, it had the right dimensions, and order it, and probably feel okay with that.
Still doesn't really have the form factor that the little birds used to have, though.
No, they don't.
So I mean,
they don't.
We've lamented this recently. I mean, I was saying all along, because the little birds and the birds, they were discontinued for a long time, but Accessories for Less still had, I think they just bought literally all the stock Focal ever had that was remaining after they discontinued them and sold them off until they were gone. And I was lamenting all along that once these disappear, I'm going to be sad. Now, for a while there, they brought in Boston Acoustics. They had the Soundware 4.5s, which didn't sound as good as the Focal Little Birds did, but they had the nice form factor. And for mostly people were just wanting Atmos speakers, they were entirely sufficient for that. But now those are gone too. So, I mean, there isn't really anything that has that exact same form factor, the super easy to mount on the ceiling or on the wall, aim them anywhere, compact size, perfect for Atmos. I don't even know if Atmos is what Alex is looking for or if he just wanted that type of form factor. If it's mostly about the form factor and it isn't about Atmos, then I could point you to Orb, because Orb Audio is still around. They do still sell the spherical speakers with the mount that you can mount them just about anywhere. It's just the price is not super cheap.
Yeah, they're expensive.
You know, they're like $250 starting. I think they're actually $299 now, aren't they? Something like that each, starting going up over this. So they're not cheap. So if this is instead about Atmos speakers, compact Atmos speakers that are easy to mount somewhere, the best solution I have for you right now, and it's not like this was going to be my top choice forever, but the best solution I have right now for something that is as affordable as the Little Birds used to be, it's actually even cheaper than that, is to get the entire 5.1 package from Monoprice, their HT35 premium 5.1 speaker package. It's like $220 normally, and you can find it on sale for like $160, $150 often over at Monoprice. So if it's over $200, just wait a little bit. It'll probably go on sale again. Now, you are getting 5 speakers and a teeny tiny little bass module. You're only going to be using 4 of them if this is about 4 Atmos speakers. But on the back of them, they have a threaded insert. Now, I want to give a shout out to Alan V, because on our advice, my advice mainly, he really did get the HT35s. He's like, yeah, for the price I paid, they're surprisingly decent little speakers. But he wanted to mount them for Atmos exactly like we said. Very clearly on Monoprice's website, it says that is a 1/4 inch by 20 threaded insert, which is a standard threaded insert for almost all speaker mounts. He's like, nah, it's actually metric. It's an M6, which is not exactly the same as the 1/4 inch by 20. It's an M6 metric. So I had suggested Video Secu's wall mounts because they are available in both a ceiling and a wall version. But he's like, no, the Video Secu's their 1/4 inch. The threaded insert on the Monoprice HD35s is a M6. So Monoprice's own low profile wall mounts, they fit. Which they also claim are 1/4 inch. No, they're M6. So I'm very glad Alan let me know about that. So Monoprice with Monoprice, the wall mounts, which are not expensive, and then the HD35 speakers, those will work. But be careful, because if you're trying to use those Monoprice mounts for something that really is a 1/4 inch threaded insert, it's not going to be snug enough. And if you use a real 1/4 inch insert on the HD35 speakers, it's too snug. But anyway, that's like my go-to recommendation now for very compact, lightweight, inexpensive, perfectly decent sounding for Atmos. But if it's mostly about you wanted the sound quality and the form factor and you're willing to pay more, then I'd point you to Orb right now.
So Orb is, for whatever reason, more expensive to order on Amazon than it is to order from them directly. Okay. It's anywhere from $289 to $349 for 2 speakers, and the Mod 1 Quick Pack over at Orb Audio is $259 for the regular gloss black. For a
that's a pair.
That's a pair. I mean, it says it's a. I mean, it shows 2 speakers. Okay. So I gotta believe it's 2 speakers.
That's not too crazy bad.
So no, it's like 125 a pop or 130 a pop. So that's not insane. So there you go.
Cool.
All right. Who we got left, Rob?
We have Chris T, who had many questions, Nathan W, who also had quite a few, Galen C, J Iris, because it's not Jarius, Carl R, and Bertrand.
I can't believe that J Iris is how that's actually pronounced.
I mean, dude, he spelled it out in the email because it clearly happens to him.
I guess it does. Okay, I'm sorry, dude. I'm not gonna. I'm certainly not. I'm certainly not gonna tell you how to say your own name.
Aren't you though, Tom? So. Aren't you?
I'm not. I'm just surprised. That's all. I mean, it seems like your name needs a hyphen. You should add a hyphen to your name. I won't tell you how to say it. I'll tell you how to spell it. There you go. Man, am I just being super white right now. All right. I want to thank Our listeners of the week, we want to thank Kevin and Dazz for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and giving us a PayPal donation, as well as our 127 patrons over at patreon.com, including Bryce. Thank you to all of you.
Indeed, Kevin and Dazz, thank you very much for those PayPal donations. Anybody else you want to give one, come to avrant.com, and on the right-hand side, it says Support AV Rant, and there's a picture of a cup of coffee, and it'll take you to PayPal. And also at patreon.com/avrantpodcast. That's where you can sign up for an automatic monthly donation. You choose the amount, $1 a minimum, and every month, they'll take it from you, give it most of it to us. So 127 patrons over there. Bryce, thank you very much for being one of them.
I want to thank the listeners who sent in notes of gratitude, including James, Brandon, Rob's dad, named Dan, Nelson, Nathan, Bastian, Chris, Luke, Chad, Daz, Vince, Jay Iris, Infinite Gary, and Bertrand.
There you go. Let's see if we can do these names. James, Brandon, Dan, Nathan, Nelson, Chris, Bastian, Luke, Chad, Daz, Vince, Jay Iris, Infinite Gary, Bertrand. Did I screw that up? I don't know if I screwed that up. Seems like I screwed it up in my mouth.
I don't know. We're going to go
Anyway,
with it.
thank you very much for the notes of support and gratitude. It's really, really appreciated right now. Thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want to get your question answered on this podcast, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com.
I did have somebody on YouTube say, "What's your contact info?" I'm like, you did not watch the video.
Liar. You fibber. For AV Rant, I'm Tom Andring.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AV Rant.
Now go out and listen to something.